So you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey everybody, welcome. This is our second journal club, and it's actually a direct sequel to the first one, but I have with us Dr. Joel Duff, and of course Vishanti. I'll start real quick with Vishanti. Vishanti, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good to hear.
I'm actually feeling a little bit more energetic than I usually have been for the past few weeks, so
Hey.
that's nice. Thanks, vitamin D supplements.
Yeah, that'll help. All right, and Dr. Joel Duff, this is your first time on the channel that you like actually appearing. You've been in the chat before, and I've obviously been in your chat plenty of times, and you are part of that group that we like to call the Science Friends. So you should probably be somewhat familiar to most of the people here, but you are linked in the description, so people can go over and go subscribe to you. But why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself, and then I will read the Turkey Sloth super chat that just came in.
Hey, I can't believe it. I'm here finally. I've seen a lot of you in the chat before, and Dapper asked me to come on over, and it's like, yeah, I definitely want to join up.
I asked you this morning. This morning I asked you in another YouTube chat.
Last minute invites. I mean, I'll take those up. Yeah. I just happen to have time. I just finished grading, so I'm a professor, and I just finished all my grading, and I need some downtime. I need some relaxation. And
nothing is more relaxing than reading the Answers research journal.
That's right.
Right.
Nothing will increase my blood pressure more, I'm sure. So.
Also, I'm
ready to do it.
Why with the video games?
This super chat is actually supposed to be a musical one. Do you want to try and sing it, Vishanti, from Turkey Sloth for $5?
Oh, this is the Hanukkah linda staki ocho candelas para mí. It's a Ladino song for Hanukkah, which just ended last night.
Yes. Wait, last night was it switched over to not Hanukkah around at sundown, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, boo, I don't get to set fires. But wait, it's Shabbat. I get to set fire.
Yep. Also, there's actually, as long as you don't actually set to fire anything you're not supposed to, you can just set a fire pretty much any time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They don't stop you, like, from just lighting a candle. You can light a candle on Monday if you want to.
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
Yeah. That's one of the things I like to remind people of. It's like, hey, yeah, you can just buy a birthday cake whenever you want. You're an adult. You don't actually have to wait for a birthday.
That's right.
Yeah.
You can eat dessert first.
Not
the boss of me.
Just do it. All right, so we are here to look at a response to the debate over classification of Archaeopteryx as a bird. Now, this is a paper that was published in the Answers Research Journal. Now, I use the word paper and journal advisedly, because the very fact that the original work that this is a response to was published indicates that this journal should not really be called a journal, because it was atrociously bad on multiple levels. There was the getting nearly all the science wrong, which we're going to get into. But then there was also just like, did anyone edit this? Because while I don't really blame the original author, Gabriella Haynes, for this, because English is her second language, and I mean, she's way better at English than I am at Portuguese, so, you know, no shade on that. But, like, you have native English speakers editing this, or at least you're supposed to. Like, did anyone look over this to fix the numerous mistakes? Also, Eddie McCoy just sent a $3 super sticker, and it was also their first super on a live stream. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. All right, so let's take a look at this. Now, I have read this before.
To be fair, she couldn't.
Oh, sorry.
Well, to be fair, ChatGPT wasn't around last year. She could have used that to edit her paper.
I mean, it probably would have fixed some of the spelling mistakes and the yeah.
Yikes.
It's a little embarrassing that ChatGPT is probably a better editor than Andrew Snelling, who is in fact the chief editor at the Answers Research Journal. So now this is a public paper. This just on the website. I'm not using any kind of like pirating or anything to access this. So this is essentially an open access paper. So if you want to follow along or read ahead, I will put the link in the chat, and then I will pin it so that way, if anyone wants to, you can take a look.
Fearmonger, the Richard Carrier of existing.
Ooh, ouch, fearmonger. Self-burn right there.
Brutal.
Wow. All right.
Woo!
So, in case you guys don't remember, the big complaints beyond just the fact that this original paper could have used at least 1 or 2 editing passes were Gabriella Haynes does not know how to read a cladogram. She does not know anything about bird anatomy. She doesn't know what a pygostyle is. She doesn't really seem to grasp how dinosaur tails work at all, whether bird or not. And another big one is that I'm going to go ahead and say that she lied about Linnaeus. And the reason I say that is because either she looked up the Linnaean criteria for a bird and then decided to ignore it while still citing it, or she cited it without looking it up. Either way, that's a dishonest thing to do, and therefore I do in fact think that she lied during that paper. And I would think that normally that would get her more or less expelled from academia, but, this is young Earth creationism, and just like with flat Earth, you kind of have to lie to support young Earth creationism, so they probably have a lot more tolerance for that over there. But, all right, so let's take a look. This is
I have a little side theory on that.
Oh, go ahead.
I think our friend Harry F. Sanders might have had some influence on her there, because he has written an article about Linnaeus and how Linnaeus believed in kinds, not species. And so he has a very elaborate understanding of Linnaean's views and how they changed over time. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's maybe a contributor to that, because he's also written about birds.
Yeah, that could be.
So she may never looked at it herself. She might have just been using our friend as a source.
All right, so this is by Matthew McLean and Dr. Marcus Ross, which are the two that I've heard of. And they both do work in vertebrate paleontology for young Earth creationists, such as it is. Most of what that means is they do baraminological stuff and then kind of pretend that means something. But we also have Noel Lay, Matthew Spites, and Matt Patrone. Sorry, Matt Patrone, I skipped over you there in the first place. I don't know who these people are. Do you know who these are, Dr. Duff?
One of them's actually a graduate student of McLean's, I believe, doing a PhD, and the other one is he's an independent researcher, lives in northern Kentucky somewhere.
An independent researcher,
unassociated with Answers in Genesis, though.
Whenever anyone says I'm an independent researcher, I just think of the guys from Ancient Aliens. That's who I think of.
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay, so the views here are not those of Answers in Genesis. They are those of the authors, so we cannot attribute any of this to Answers in Genesis per se. They did publish it, but that doesn't make it per se, P-E-R-S-A-Y, one word. One word. All right, so let's just get into this.
I thought they were going to be blacklisted, honestly. I mean, really, like, these authors are the young Earth evolutionists that they've been complaining about.
Yeah,
they've at least allowed them to publish here, although, of course, they get an immediate response in the same publication. They're not allowed to stand alone. There's always a response that comes with it.
Right.
So that you never...
Which is actually really unusual, that you're going to publish a response to the response in the same edition of the same journal right afterwards. It's normally something that you would want to take at least a few months to work on your response with. Like, hey, okay, what can I take on board? Did they get any criticisms right? But you know what? That's the response to the response is a story for next week. So this is the initial response. In a recent publication, Gabriella Haynes, 2022, argued that Archaeopteryx should be considered a bird rather than a dinosaur, that birds and dinosaurs are obviously distinct, that statistical baraminology is too influenced by evolutionary thinking to be of use to creationists, and that scientists should only use Linnaean taxonomy in classifying organisms. Now, I think that statement that scientists should only use Linnaean taxonomy is probably a little bit stronger than is completely justified. I didn't get the sense that she was saying it should be the exclusive way that taxonomy was done. But then again, I mean, maybe I was just giving her the benefit of the doubt. Do you remember her coming away from the paper thinking that that's her goal was to say that only Linnaean taxonomy should be used by creationists?
No, I think that's a little strong.
Okay, yeah, me too. We are glad to see other creationist scientists engaging. Sorry, it's just funny whenever I hear someone.
Scientists.
It's like whenever someone's like, "Well, I'm a flat Earth cartographer." It's like, "Yeah, sure you are, buddy."
Sure.
But okay, I'll get past that. We're glad to see other creationist scientists engaging with the beauty and complexity of God's design, especially in the area of paleontology and the complex issues surrounding dinosaurs, birds, and feathers. And that is fair. There are a lot of complex issues. That's a real thing. Nonetheless, we recognize multiple issues with Dr. Haynes' assumptions, methodologies, and conclusions. One, there appears to be an unfamiliarity with cladistics and statistical baraminology, which is putting it extremely mildly.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
Right, because in the original paper, Dr. Haynes was comparing different cladograms which had Archaeopteryx on it, and in some of them, it was included in Aviale, and in some of them, it was put just outside of Aviale. Sometimes it was put like sister to Aviale plus Deinonychosauria. Sometimes it was linked into Deinonychosauria with Aviale coming out as the sister group to that group. And but in some of them, whenever it was not inside Aviale, which is a clade of dinosaurs that are basically more like birds than like Velociraptor and those other dromaeosaurid dinosaurs are. That's where you get Aviale. So every time it was put in Aviale, she was like, see, this is a cladogram where it's a bird. And then every other time, she would say, this is a cladogram where it's a dinosaur. Except that all of the cladograms said it was a dinosaur, because if Aviale comes out of the dinosaur group, it's a dinosaur. That's just how cladograms work. So yeah, saying that she is unfamiliar with cladistics is putting it mildly. Let's see, and specifically how these disciplines, that's cladistics and baraminology, build and employ morphological datasets. 2, discussions of dinosaurs and birds' feathers are at times imprecise and inconsistent with the current state of vertebrate anatomy and taxonomy. Again, that is putting it very mildly. And 3, several biblical and philosophical conclusions extend beyond the claims of Scripture. Based on abundant evidence from numerous taxa, we recognize that feathers, including bristles, down, and pennaceous types, are found broadly across Coelurosaurian theropods. There's a group of theropods. Basically, it includes like T-Rex and oviraptors and therizinosaurs and the things you think of as raptors like Velociraptor, Deinonychus, Utahraptor. But it also includes birds. That the anatomy of Archaeopteryx is strikingly similar to dromaeosaurid and troodontid theropod dinosaurs. Very true. And that the morphological datasets which tabulate the physical character states of these taxa are both accurate and robust. Employing these datasets through baraminological methods has allowed creation researchers to distinguish various kinds of dinosaurs and birds. Importantly, the presence of feathers on dinosaurs neither implies nor entails an evolutionary connection between the groups. And one thing I want to point out is, when they say that Archaeopteryx has an anatomy strikingly similar to dromaeosaurids, that's the group that includes, Velociraptor. This is the model that Answers in Genesis has on their ark, right? This is in their kinds room. And I want to point out that their model of Archaeopteryx has the big killer claw of a dromaeosaurid, right? Or a troodontid. That's technically called a hypertrophy digit 2 on the Pez. Also, Eddie McCoy just gifted Dapper Dinosaur membership. Thank you very much, Eddie McCoy. And I will announce who it went to once that pops up. It went to April Van Ryn. Thank you very much. So, Answers in Genesis is well aware that this animal has some distinct similarities to dromaeosaurids because that's how they depict it. Okay. Introduction. Among living animals, birds are incredibly unique. There is only one other group of extant flying vertebrates, bats, and no other living animal group possesses the complex branching and tegumentary structures that we call feathers. The discovery of Archaeopteryx in the mid-19th century was a surprise to scientists. It was a surprise to some of them, but the similarity between bird anatomy and theropod anatomy was already well known, and there had been people suggesting that perhaps birds evolved from reptiles, and that specifically those reptiles might have been dinosaurs. So it was a surprise to some people, like, Richard Owen, famously an anti-evolutionist, but it was not a surprise to the majority of scientists working in the field, because most of them were accepting some form of evolution and were expecting to see transitional fossils. And this was kind of early confirmation of that. You also have to remember that this was after Darwin published The Origin of Species, in which he, basically predicted, we should find at least some transitional forms here and there. Savage Monkeyfish Cobra says, for $5, says, ARJ contains neither good answers nor rigorous research, nor is it an effectively peer-reviewed journal. Yeah, that is all of that is accurate. Anyway, a creature with the feathers of a bird, yet possessing other features not recognized among modern birds, including teeth, a long bony tail, and clawed manual digits, now known to be relatively common in birds, occurring in at least 170 genera in 22 orders, Vine and Schwing, 2017, which, yes, I do want to point that out. A lot of times you'll hear creationists incorrectly state that, like, only the Watsine or something has wing claws. That's not true. Ostrich, like, all ratites have wing claws. Most of Gallo and Seri, which is like the fowl, the ground and the waterfowl, have wing claws. If you've ever like bought chicken wings raw from the store, chances are that they will still have the claw attached to the thumb, and you can just grab it right there. You can feel the dinosaur claw in your hand from an actual dinosaur by just buying some chicken wings at the store that are raw. And ones that are prepared, usually either the entire hand is removed or the thumb claw is snipped off by like a restaurant or something. So if you're getting them from like a store that they're already cooked, probably won't have the thumb claw. You have to get them raw. Anyway, Richard Owen, 1863, thought Archaeopteryx was an unusual bird, whereas other researchers concluded it was a reptile with skin structures that merely resembled feathers. For example, Wagner, 1862. The debate as to what sort of creature Archaeopteryx was continues up to the present day. Only kind of, right? The exact placement within like Deinonychosauria and Aviale, like all of those things are a little bit up in the air, but like it's definitely a dinosaur by everyone who's checking, except I guess Alan Fiducia, every creationist favorite paleoornithologist. So it's, we know that it's close to Deinonychosauria, if not within Deinonychosauria, and we know that Deinonychosauria is close to Aviale, if not a parent group from which Aviale springs. Like that also is a possibility. Especially since many scientists have posited that it is an example of a transitional form linking dinosaurs and birds. For example, Foth, Tischlinger, and Rahut 2014, Huxley 1870, Ostrom 1976. It would be more than a century from Archaeopteryx' discovery for fossils of animals traditionally assigned to dinosaurs yet sporting feathers to be unearthed. This includes representatives of the Dromaeosauridae, the Troodontidae, the Ornithomimosauria, and the Oviraptorosauridae, which are, interestingly, ones that I mentioned. Each of which now include taxa possessing pennaceous feathers. Yes. For example, Chiang et al. 1998, Van der Reest, Wolf and Curry 2016, Shu et al. 2003, 2003A, 2003B, busy year for Shu, and 2017 respectively. Still other dinosaur fossils display evidence of filamentous structures that may or may not be homologous with feathers, for example, Sinosauropteryx, Psittacosaurus, Tianyulong, and Coelurosdromes. Now there's something that I'm a little curious about. How do these young Earth creationists define homology? Because they're using the term, and they're correctly identifying that there are these structures that may be... Oh, I pinned the wrong comment. I'm sorry, everybody. I pinned the wrong comment. I meant to pin my comments, and because of the stupid little heart thing that I hate, I pinned the wrong one.
Yeah, that thing drives me nuts.
Yeah, it's the worst. Yeah, so now the correct message should be pinned, and you can use that to go access this article. So yeah, Dr. Duff, do you have any insight as to how a young Earth creationist would define homology in a way that they could use it in their research without it implying, as it normally does, common ancestry?
Well, that's a great question. As soon as you said that, I realized, wow, I hadn't really even thought about how they're using before. I do think McLean, he understands it. And as you said, he's using it correctly. I think what they're going to back up to is they're going to say that these are two features that God used in the same way in two separate organisms, two separate creations, right? He has this plan in his mind of like using a common body and pattern, and then sort of replicating that and adding a few new features. And I guess they could say, well, look, there's two features like a bat wing and a bird wing. He would say those aren't homologous in the sense that they're created in the same way, right? They're not based on the same body plan. They use different anatomical features in order to create those wings. But in this case, we can see that they're using the same underlying principles of design, and therefore we'll call those homologous. That's my best shot.
That seems reasonable to me as to what they mean. It's just striking to me because homology so strongly implies common descent. I mean, I would argue that it just means common descent in many cases. In many textbooks, you'll actually see homology defined in terms of common descent. So, yeah. But
and this is what irks Ken Ham and so forth, the Answers in Genesis, why they call them young earth evolutionists, because they're so fluid with the evolutionary language.
yeah,
Even while trying to deny that homology exists, they understand the terminology, and they may have their own sort of definition for it, but they fluidly use the evolutionary language.
Turkey Sloth for $5 says, "Why am I unsurprised that newer citations aren't linked if they're open access?" So I do believe that there is a list of sources at the end, which you can cross-reference with these. So, for example, at the end of the paper, I believe there's a works cited page where you see Garner, Wood, and Ross 2013. You can actually get the full citation, including full names of the authors, the publication date, the name of the paper, if there's a DOI, the DOI, things like that. So that's actually pretty common for inline citations, that you have a sources list at the end, and then you just put in the author or authors and date without like a hyperlink or anything. Because remember, this is primarily something that was printed, so like I'm not really expecting there to be hyperlinks in it. So that's pretty in line with what I would expect from even a real paper at an open access journal. So
That's fair.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm also a little bit forgiving because it's the Answers Research Journal, right? It's like when you have the kid with a plastic stethoscope and they put the stethoscope over like the wrong part of your chest to listen to your heart. I'm like, who cares? Just let them go with it. These discoveries have started a lively discussion in the creationist literature concerning the nature of these creatures and what they mean for a biblical worldview. It's always so weird to me because, like, the idea that a scientific journal would care what anything means for a biblical worldview, and also the idea that there's only one biblical worldview, are both bizarre to me. There are about as many biblical worldviews as there are people claiming to have a biblical worldview. It's roughly about what it is. There might actually be a few more than that. Two main perspectives have been...
Is that the Christian equivalent of 2 Jews, 3 opinions?
Basically, yeah. Two main perspectives have been put forth. The first holds that these fossils are examples of properly identified dinosaurs that possess a range of feather morphologies. For example, Garner, Wood, and Ross. And for some reason, I earlier today thought that Wood was a co-author on this, and he's not. So, I guess I thought maybe he was an author because I overall like this paper, and I generally like Todd Wood. So I figured maybe he just must have been an author, because otherwise I would have hated it more. McLean Patron and Spites 2018, Surtees 2021. I was gonna say, like, it's a little iffy to cite yourself so much because a lot of these are just authors of this paper. But then I realized, yeah, but it's young Earth creationists writing about dinosaurs and feathers. There's not that many people that they could possibly cite that fit those criteria other than the authors of this paper. So, the second holds true that feathers have only been recovered on birds, resulting in proposals to reassign some feathered dinosaurs to birds, and or argue that degraded collagen has been mistaken for feathers among some dinosaurs. For example, Sarfati, Thomas, and Tay 2020, Haynes 2022, Thomas and Sarfati 2018. By the way, I've read some of Sarfati's work on dinosaurs. It is atrocious. He does not understand even the most basic things about the anatomy of the animals that he's talking about. He should probably stick to playing chess, which he's undisputedly very good at. Pibblepunk, the apistivist, member for 6 months and is at the amniote level, says, moving this $5 a month over to Patreon instead. Well, thank you very much. I do appreciate it. I do keep more of the money over at Patreon. So, also, you can get a 15% discount if you go annual. Sometimes I say it's 10%. That's just because I'm wrong when I say that. Look, I am never someone who's going to be telling you that I never get things wrong. I get things wrong all the time. A recent article by Haynes, which is the one this is responding to, critiqued previous creationist research arguing for feathered dinosaurs and claimed that there is no reason for Archaeopteryx to be anything other than a bird. Now, the thing is, the thing that Haynes in 2022 didn't seem to get was that whether or not Archaeopteryx is a bird actually doesn't matter to the question of whether or not it's a dinosaur. Because the real question is dinosaur a category, is bird a category of dinosaur, right? Like, everyone agrees that Ceratopsian is a category of dinosaur. Are birds another category, is the question. So Archaeopteryx can be as much a bird as you want, right? it's still a dinosaur. Just like I saw 2 Harris hawks eating a white-winged dove outside. Just today. Right outside my house.
Just like a white-winged dove, sing the song just like she's singing.
And guess what?
I had to.
Those are 3 dinosaurs. They're birds and they're dinosaurs. Which also was really kind of cool to watch some nature, although they kind of dug into that white-winged dove while it was still screaming, which was yeah. That's one of the reasons why whenever anyone's like, oh, things that are natural are good, I'm like, I'm sorry, have you seen nature? There's a reason humans invented houses and air conditioning and refrigeration and all this nonsense to get us away from nature. Nature is horrible. It's fascinating and cool, and I love it. But I want it to impede on my personal life as little as possible. I want a nice big barrier between me and nature. Nature is full of horrible, horrible things that will kill you. In this response, we address several relevant issues and provide alternatives that are consistent with both the biblical account and the fossil record. These include 1. Aspects of classification and analytical taxonomy, 2. Anatomical features of dinosaurs, birds, and feathers, 3. The anatomy of Archaeopteryx, and 4. Careful attention to the claims of Scripture. Now, I don't particularly care about number 4. It's not that I don't care about the claims of Scripture overall. It's just that this is a science channel, and I can't imagine ever basing a scientific conclusion or anything like that on my interpretation of the Bible. It's just an alien concept to me. Yeah, I don't know. Classification and taxonomy. Haynes argues that the presence of feathers has been the key to classifying an animal as a bird based on classical, conventional, and traditional taxonomy developed by Linnaeus in the 18th century. Haynes, 2022, page 288. Later, she states, following the classical traditional Linnaean classification and reasoning, it is concluded there is no reason for Archaeopteryx to be anything other than a bird. However, Linnaeus' entry for aves in the groundbreaking 10th edition of Systema Naturae noted that a defining feature of birds is that they are edentulate, lacking teeth. Linnae 1806-4, which is a good point. We actually, when Vishanti and I went over this, we brought up an online copy of a scan of the Latin 10th edition of Linnaeus' Systema Naturae. And we read that damn definition in Latin, translating as we went.
Mm-hmm.
We checked. It was very clear that birds do not have teeth. If you have teeth, you are not a bird. Which begs the question that these authors are being too polite, and I get it. They're trying to do this like it's a scientific paper. But it really does beg the question. How did that happen? Did she not read the definition and then cite it anyway? Or did she read the definition and then just kind of like, okay, sure, it doesn't actually fit, but I don't care anymore because it's better for my argument if I just pretend. And either way, I would classify that as dishonesty. I don't know. Do either of you disagree with me on that?
How many? Let's face it. How many of her audience are going to read this in Latin and translate it for themselves?
2 at least.
They're never going to know. They're never going to know.
Well, I'm part of her audience because I read it and I went and read the classification in Latin. So, my Latin isn't amazing, but it's good enough. Plus, it's not like Systema Naturae is exactly like, we're not reading like an Ovid poem here. It's not the most complex Latin that's ever been written. You're not doing one of those senatorial speeches where you nest like 18 clauses and then you have to wait for the last word of the entire like 20-minute sentence until you get the main verb. Like, that's not what we're doing here.
Yeah, my mom taught me a lot of Latin when I was younger, but I still had to have Latin done for me when I named some new species and families and had to have a Latin description.
Nice.
Still had to send that off, like make sure it's right.
Interestingly, when I compose sentences in Latin, I almost always end up with the main verb last. And I don't know why, but that's just my default order for Latin sentences. I don't always do it, but it's my default. And so if I'm just composing Latin, which I do very rarely, but if I do it, yeah, that main verb is going last. And I think it's based on the fact that was like how the fancy Latin speakers use Latin in many cases to keep the audience, at the edge of their seat, like, what's that main verb going to be? That's an important part of this sentence. DM.
Latin doesn't change, so obviously birds don't change, right?
Well, there you go. Problem solved.
See? The definitions, once you get this definition down, you're good. You'll know what a bird is forever.
DM current issues in Science Wing for $5 says, I'm sorry I'm late. You can start now. Turtles. Thank you very much. Okay. Based on this, Archaeopteryx and numerous other fossil avians cannot be birds because they possess teeth. For example, Bohyornis, Ichthyornis, and Hesperornis. Yep, that is true. For Haynes to argue that Archaeopteryx is a bird requires that she too must modify or reject the Linnaean definition, a practice that she heavily criticizes, which, yes, that is true. They are absolutely pointing out correctly that she cannot classify these animals as birds and then pretend that she's not modifying what it means to be a bird from the traditional standpoint. But also, it's important to remember, we said that we were referencing the 10th edition of Systema Naturae. You know what that means? There were at least 9 earlier ones, and as we see here, there are 13 overall. And actually, I don't remember if we referenced the 10th or the 13th or what. Also, Dutch Tunicate Official for $2 says, oh my goodness. Je collection des aubergines, which is AIG. Thank you very much. We're not doing the drink counter because I'm drinking coffee today, but I do appreciate it. And for $2, Tremo says, as I recall, the proper order for Latin was SOV. That was a common word order, but like Latin, because it is a heavily case marking language where the semantic role of each noun is usually marked very explicitly on that noun, it has a fairly free word order. And so word order, while it does have a default, it then in a long discourse, the order of the words ends up being based on discourse level concerns about emphasis and de-emphasis and things like that. So if you want to know what the most important part of a sentence is in a long discourse in Latin, often it'll end up being the first word. So, or the first like little phrase, like it might be a noun phrase, right? Okay. We submit that this is entirely reasonable and necessary to change and update the definitions and contents of taxonomic groups as we learn more about nature. Indeed, Linnaeus himself constantly updated Systema Naturae over its 13 editions. Yes. So not even Linnaeus was like, this is the final word on classification and it shall never be changed. Like Linnaeus didn't do that thing like at the end of Revelation where he's like, anyone who adds or subtracts from this word of the Lord shall be cursed forever. Like he didn't do that, right? Linnaeus was not John of Patmos. And some of these changes,
another edition, he'd have to acknowledge that all modern birds have bird teeth genes still.
That's a good point.
Know that.
Yeah, birds actually have the full set of genes that would normally make teeth, except that they're pseudogenes. Like they have a gene to make, they have a pseudogene that would make enamel, but it's broken. It can't actually make enamel. So it's a curious thing there. And some of the
curious homology, isn't it?
Yeah, well, what actually happened is every single bird, quote unquote, kind, all lost teeth independently. Obviously, that's the most likely explanation. They all lost teeth in the same way, curiously enough, with the same mutations. Which, we could run statistics on that and see if that gives us a big number. Which, yeah, it will. Indeed, Linnaeus himself, yeah, okay, we read that. For example, Linnaeus introduced the binomial nomenclature of genus and species in the 10th edition. He also, among many other changes, reclassified whales as mammals rather than fish. Yep. Which also, I point that out all the time. Every argument I've ever heard from a creationist that birds aren't dinosaurs would work just as well if you change it to whales aren't mammals, right? They just point out how birds are unique, which, granted, birds are unique. But then they say, therefore, they're not dinosaurs because other dinosaurs aren't like that. Well, that works for any group of mammals, right? You can say that, like, I don't know, bats aren't mammals because mammals don't fly. Well, none of the other ones do, that's true, but this group does. It doesn't make them not mammals. Anyway, and for $10, Turkey Sloth says, I'm aware of the inline citations, but I have several OA articles from Linguistics Topology which link the works cited page with the article itself. I mean, it does sound more convenient if you're going to publish online. I'm just not going to get after these guys for not doing it. So, plus, I'm pretty sure they're not the ones who actually put this on the website. I'm pretty sure that it was someone from the editorial staff. So, let's see. It is surprising then that Haynes disparages those who change the definitions for taxonomic groups throughout her article, while simultaneously acknowledging that in all scientific fields and endeavors, scientists do not understand everything which is why there is a need to keep researching. Scientists also have fallible and finite minds in this fallen world, and as they try to understand the creatures created by the Creator's perfect, infinite, and creative mind. Which is that's a sentence, I guess. Haynes 2022 with the page numbers. We agree with these points, and it is precisely because our knowledge is incomplete, requires frequent updates, and is prone to errors and corrections that adjustments and updates to biological definitions are necessary and a welcome feature of good scientific work. Which, yeah, I agree with. It seems weird to have someone argue that we should just ossify our classification system at, like, I guess, say the 13th edition of this one book by this one guy who, sure, he invented a lot of what we now use in taxonomy. He invented the big labels and the, idea of binomial nomenclature. Okay, that's really important. But, like, is the argument that we're never going to learn something that he didn't know that might upset some of his conclusions from, the 18th century here in the 21st century? Like, it's just a weird argument. But I think, tell me what you think about this, Vishanti and Dr. Duff. I think it comes from the idea that her primary resource for knowing about the world, forming her philosophy and everything, is the Bible. And for her, the Bible is a set of 66 books, which are not being updated. They're not really changing. At most, you might get like a new translation that might use slightly better manuscripts, which might give us a slightly better, more likely to be original reading of a few passages here and there. But even then, the vast majority of the books of the 66 book Protestant canon are not under any significant amount of like uncertainty as to what the original said, right? There are variants, but most of it is very well established. And so I think she has a tendency, I think this is a creationist thing, they have a tendency to treat other things like that. It's also why they seem to think that like Darwin was just the prophet of evolutionism and his works are sacrosanct, because that's how they operate. Like, my ideas were handed down by Moses and Isaiah and Jesus, and those are the ideas of my religion. That's what I stick with. And the evolutionists have their own religion, and their ideas were handed down from on high by Chucky D.
From Darwin.
Yep. Do you?
Yeah, you're spot on.
Yeah. Okay. That's my intuition, and I'm glad that you agree with me on that one.
I think it illustrates, though, that this paper shows that not all creationists have that wooden
Oh yeah, no, and
way of thinking, though, because that's what makes these individuals a little bit different.
Yeah, I will
they're
say
still going to subscribe to the major views, but they have a better appreciation for the scientific process.
Absolutely, and I will say that like Marcus Ross, Matt McLean, Todd Wood, to some extent Kurt Wise, I do put them as being in a bit of a higher tier than like Gabriella Haynes or Andrew Snelling. Not that I would agree with them or everything that they're doing, and not that I think that they're really doing science in the normal sense. However, they're clearly much more willing to challenge the otherwise dogmatic conclusions of other young Earth creationists, right? Because Ken Ham wants to turn young Earth creationism into a series of dogmas that other young Earth creationists are not allowed to question. And they're largely arbitrary because they're just the things he thinks are true. It's not based on anything in particular. It's just his conclusions. Those should be dogma. Like, he's going to be like the Pope of young Earth creationism who pontificates ex cathedra about all of the things that you must believe to be in good standing with the community of young Earth creationists. One of which is that birds aren't dinosaurs, which is a position he holds for...
What's the Latin word for ark?
I don't know.
You're supposed to know this.
You know that I don't know that much Latin.
Actually, I don't.
Okay, well, spoiler alert.
Sound like you do.
I don't know that much Latin. I don't know most of the words in Latin. And if you ask me to recite like a declension table right now, I'm probably going to fail. Anyway, the primary thrust of Hayes' article is...
So the reason I was asking, because I'm trying to make a joke. That's your prompt to look it up.
Oh, fine, I'll look up how to say arc in Latin. It's probably just going to be like arc.
arca. So Ken Ham is speaking ex arca.
There you go.
Cannot believe you made me do all this just to get that.
But also, shouldn't you be using the ablative case and not the nominative case?
This is why I asked you to do this.
Well, I didn't know you were going to put the preposition X in front of it. How am I supposed to know that?
The
Also,
things that I have to do.
You think I know the declension of arca off the top of my head? Because I don't. Let's
As
see.
if I even knew to use that declension. Like, come on.
Well, it's only got one declension. It's one verb. I mean, one noun. And it's so nominative is arca and ablative is arca with the long vowel. So there you go. That's the difference. You have to lengthen that last vowel.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome.
Or
Okay,
the accusative arcam.
Ooh, there you go. I
I
understand now why it is that when I had Dr. Josh Bowen from Digital Hammurabi come on, that he thought that I was a linguist. I get it. Plus, I'm the only person who talks to him about Sumerian etymology and like syntax instead of talking to him about biblical slavery, which he's super tired of talking about.
Yeah.
The primary thrust of Hayes' article is that creationists who have accepted feathered dinosaurs have succumbed to evolutionary thinking. Which is, I mean, that's right in line with the whole young Earth evolutionist thing, right? Her article was basically just a long-form version of one of those young Earth evolutionist articles that Harry Sanders was primarily in charge of. I don't think he was the only author, but you read a lot of them and it just kind of screams Harry F. Sanders wrote this. Oh, Vandalia 1998 has renewed their membership to the level of Amniote. Welcome. And Michael Narum, who's been a member for 1 month and is at the Amniote level, says, I am consistently surprised by Dapper's seemingly endless knowledge, especially when it comes to language. Well, thank you. I kind of know in most cases which case to use in Latin. So, yeah, I mean, to be fair, part of that is because the terms that we use for cases in linguistics were largely based on Latin and how Latin uses those cases. And then in other languages, we're like, okay, so this is the nominative case, except for these cases where it's weird. And by weird, what we mean is not how Latin does it, because Latin is obviously the default. Right? It's super Eurocentric, but it's too late to fix that. It's just like the International Phonetic Alphabet. It's mostly just the Latin alphabet, which is, again, super Eurocentric, but again, also kind of too late. Okay, so the primary thrust of Hayes' article, blah, blah, blah. She cites as evidence, the use of cladistic datasets and terminology by creationists doing statistical baraminology rather than traditional Linnaean systematics. Which, I mean, baraminology, when you actually read a baraminology paper, it's basically a cladistic analysis, but you exclude as much data as you possibly can in order to get large amounts of barometric distance so that you can pretend that you have more than one kind. That's ultimately all it is, right?
I'm sorry. Anytime I hear baramin or baraminology,
Oh, yeah.
I can't even take it seriously. It's like, oh yeah, flat earth cartographers. Flat earth cartography. That is the equivalent.
Well, also,
it's silly. It doesn't exist. It's useless.
The word itself also always kind of makes my eye twitch a little bit, because not only is the Hebrew wrong, you're also combining it with a Greek suffix. It's just all over the place. Yep. I hate it.
It is nonsense top to bottom.
Yeah. Like, hey, there's a form of the verb in Hebrew that corresponds pretty well to, like, the passive participle, which is what you want here. You didn't use it.
I'm not even going to try to help them with that.
Well, the thing is, like,
they can't be bothered.
Like, you could just ask a Hebrew scholar. Like, they're out there. They'll tell you.
Why would they do that?
I know.
Why would they do that?
Yeah, because it's so much easier to just, like, look up bara in the dictionary and say, oh, it means created, and not realize that it means that because it is the, It is the non-past third-person masculine singular form of the verb with a simple aspect.
Listen, I can't even rely on them to
No, it's the past verb.
Greek they learned in seminary. Why would I expect them to even know basic Hebrew grammar?
I mean, I managed to get some of it, and I never even went to seminary.
Yeah, well, you're also not a young Earth creationist, so.
Was.
You have this thing called standards.
True. Vandali 1998 for $10 says, I had to work 2 night shifts back drive through at 29 degrees Fahrenheit. Oof. So my voice is gone and my throat is sore. Hope you are all doing better. Remember, if it's below freezing, save a life, eat at home. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope they let you wear like a coat and like gloves or something. I don't know, because that's too cold. All right. All right, we're gonna go a little bit past because she's just complaining. They're just complaining. However, it is an overly simplistic view. Linnaeus' taxonomic method was certainly intended to reflect Genesis' account of God creating according to kinds, but it was also steeped in a Platonic conception of ideal forms. In fact, I actually think that that is a criticism that can be levied at the creationist understanding of biology generally, right? Because the fact that they never give any kind of rigorous definition for kind, and in many cases they use this thing called the cognitum, which is just kind of, well, you just look and you kind of know intuitively what a kind is. What that's hearkening back to is the Platonic ideal, right? Like, in the realm of ideals, that is not a physical place, but it is the place that is the most real. There is this concept of canid that exists out there. And the modern canines that we see are variations that deviate in certain ways from the ideal of the canid, but you can tell that they participate in the ideal of the canid up in the realm of the ideals. And the thing is, I mean, Platonism has long had an influence in Christian theology, right? We get, very early on in Christian writings, interaction with Platonic philosophy, and just generally Greek philosophy of all sorts of kinds, right? Because remember, Christianity is starting and developing in a heavily Hellenized area of the world. The Romans were heavily influenced by Hellenistic philosophy. The primary intellectual opponents of Christianity were mostly Greek philosophers. And so that's the world that they're living in. And so that influences a lot of Christian philosophy all the way through, right? Like, we get a lot of Greek philosophy even now in the Roman Catholic Church. Like, the entire idea of transubstantiation, it's not Platonic, it's Aristotelian. But still, you're getting this from Greek philosophy. And so I see that as just kind of the basis of the whole idea of kinds in the first place, is that this is sort of a Platonic ideal situation. And I don't know, does Dr. Duff, what do you think about my interpretation of that as kind of the background in terms of when creationists are thinking about kinds, what they're actually thinking about?
You're not leaving me with much to say, because I think
Sorry.
I think you're right on. I totally agree.
This is why I brought Dr. Duff on. It was
just
to be a cheerleader for me.
Yes, right.
Next,
well, there's only so much I can say about language. I barely know English.
Next time we're going to get you some pom-poms. It'll be great. For most of his life, Linnaeus believed...
As long as I don't wear a tutu. I'm not wearing no tutus.
All right, that's fair. Yeah. Let's see. For most of his life, Linnaeus believed that the species he described were in fact the created kinds. Species is the Latin word for kind. Yes, as we have repeatedly pointed out on this channel, if you read the Vulgate, as translated by Saint Jerome way back in, what was it, the 5th century? Don't quote me on...
I thought he was Saint Jerome.
Yeah, many times the word mean in Hebrew is just translated into species. Now, that's not how it would have been pronounced by Jerome back then, but it's the same word. And that these species were fixed and immutable. His views on species fixity changed as he became aware of evidence of hybridization in both plants and animals, Garner 2009. So while Linnaeus' concepts were biblically minded, they were also strongly influenced by non-biblical philosophy. Yeah, that's true. In fact, I would argue that I don't know that there's anyone currently reading the Bible without a heavy influence from non-biblical things in the world around them, right? Like, when you read the Bible, when most people read the Bible, they are importing things like aspects of moral philosophy, of scientific knowledge, and things like that into their reading of it when they interpret it. Because, I mean, that's the circumstance that modern readers find themselves in. You're not in the Iron Age in Canaan. So you're not going to read it like someone who is. And I think that's okay.
Well, that's the irony of AIG, though. They want to read literally as if they want you to read it in a way that doesn't import your modern thought, but they don't want to read it in the sense of what their audience of the original authors of the Bible would have been talking to.
Oh yeah.
Right? They're not willing to import themselves back to that period of time and try to understand the social and political and environmental environment in which that text was written.
Yeah, like, I mean, you ask the average guy at AIG, like, about Iron Age culture or languages or anything, and just, I don't know. I mean, these are the people who, when they put up pictures of Torah scrolls, typically show them upside down, because then it looks like left justified text that has the bottom line as the basis for the text, which is not how Hebrew works. Hebrew is written right to left, and the top line is the basis for the text. Things hang down rather than ascending, primarily. I mean,
me bonkers.
Yeah, I really hate the upside down Torah scrolls. It is, I see it, and it just, like, it's like a screw just, like, boring into my temple. I'm just like, no, God, why? We got a couple things here. The South Geek 4, A New Hope, who's been a member for 8 months and is at the annual level, says, oh no, I'm late. Did we get Bilbo'd yet? We did not get Bilbo'd. Should? Nope, we don't need to Bilbo anyone. Don't let that pesky hobbit into our streams. Hit like instead. Yes, do hit like, but no, we don't need to be Bilboing anyone yet. Regarding Harry F. Sanders III and seminary/cemetery, this is from My Unfinished Journey for $5. It's almost like studying the Bible on its own terms debunks the idea of biblical inerrancy. I mean, I'm not super going to get into the theology there, but I mean, depending on your canon, it is hard to argue that the Bible does not say things that are not historically true, right? Like, even if we just look at, like, the gospel narrative in Luke, there was no census that corresponds to the census in the nativity narrative in Luke. There's never been a census in which people had to return to some ancestral hometown. For one thing, what would be the point of that? For another thing, how would that just work logistically? And for a third thing, it defeats the entire point of a census, which is to figure out how many people live where. Right? It's not to figure out how many descendants King David has, because censuses are for taxes. Who gives a crap where the descendants of King David are living, or how many of them there are?
Yeah,
you want to know?
Wouldn't care about that anyway.
Right. So, yeah, like, that's not a thing that happened. There were censuses around that time. None of them seem to correspond very well with that time frame, but there definitely was never a census where everyone went to the hometown of their distant ancestors. It's the whole thing is just like,
I'm just like,
and if you get
even going back 2 generations, that would completely fall apart.
Dr. Tapioca Weasel has gifted a membership, and it went to Alex Markle. So thank you very much to Dr. Tapioca Weasel, and congrats to Alex Markle. All right, here we go. So while Linnaeus' concepts were biblically minded, they were also strongly influenced. Yeah, we'll cut that. Furthermore, Linnaeus' taxonomic method was later co-opted by evolutionary workers who argue that the nested hierarchies in which species were classified were best explained by common ancestry. I don't know about co-opted. I think that this is what you call a retrodiction, right? A retrodiction in science is where you find data that previously had no particular explanation. It was just there. This is how things were, and maybe it's treated as like a brute fact. And then you come up with a theory that not only makes predictions, but also makes sense of previous data that otherwise didn't have an explanation. That's a retrodiction. So what evolution does is it retrodictively explains the nested hierarchy that Linnaeus found. That's not co-opting. That's pointing out, oh, hey, now all of this makes sense. It doesn't otherwise, right? There's no particular reason why an intelligent designer should design things in nested hierarchies. In fact, when we look at actual things that are intelligently designed, they don't fit nested hierarchies unless the intent is to make them look not designed. So, for instance, I like to use constructed languages as an example, right? Because people are now increasingly familiar with that idea, right? Like, we know that there was that guy who created Dothraki for the Game of Thrones show, and he also created he created a bunch of languages. He also did High Valyrian. He also did a bunch of languages for the show Defiant on Sci-Fi. He did the Kryptonian for Man of Steel. He did the Dark Elf language for Thor 2. He's all over the place, right? But you'll notice that these languages don't fit into a nested hierarchy like real languages do, right? Like, you can't say, oh, Dothraki is an Indo-European language in the Celtic brain. It's not. It's its own thing that's unconnected to anything else. Whereas natural languages do tend to fall into these nested hierarchies, right? Like we know that English is Indo-European. We know it's on the Kentum side of the divide between Indo-Iranian and actual European European languages. We know it's Germanic. We know it's West Germanic. Like we can draw these family trees. And if you want to draw a similar family tree with constructed languages, in some cases you can, right? Like if you take a look at Tolkien, his Elvish languages had a nested hierarchy. But that was specifically because his design goal was to make it look like they were not constructed languages and that they were in fact natural languages that had evolved naturally from a common ancestor. So just saying that it's co-opted by evolution, like evolution is the one thing that actually explains nested hierarchies. Common design is counterindicated anytime you have a nested hierarchy. You need an extra explanation on top of that. And usually the explanation is, well, the designer wants it to seem like evolution happened, which is a weird thing for God to do in creating life, because it implies a certain amount of dishonesty on the part of God, if that's what's actually going on. Vandali 1998 for $10, I'm gonna have to scroll up, says, joke for you, an advertiser went to promote a new drink, but couldn't write, so he drew 3 pics. One of a guy dead, second of him drinking, and third of him happy and refreshed. However, they read right to left. Ah, that would probably not be a good ad. So Linnaeus concepts were biblically minded, blah, blah, blah. It is therefore quite clear that employing Linnaean systematics does not guarantee that one's methods or results are biblical. I guess so. I don't care. That's anytime someone says to me, this science isn't biblical, it's like, okay, well, it's not purple either, so that's great. I don't know, maybe you have a different take on that, Dr. Duff. Do you care if science is biblical or not? I know you're a Christian, so maybe that matters more to you, and then it might to other people who aren't Christians? I don't know.
Well, no. I mean, other than just the sense that, since I would believe that the world is God's creation, that science is a way of exploring that creation.
Okay.
But I don't necessarily find those rules to be like, okay, I have to find and confirm a certain thing from the Bible.
Haynes is
almost like scientists don't pick the conclusion first and then try to do science to prove it. They let the science lead them to the conclusion.
No, see, they got their conclusions from Darwin, and they're not allowed to change them. That's how it works. Never mind that lots of things that Darwin thought was true, we no longer think are true. Like gemmules. Nope, not a thing. Haynes is correct.
If Darwin thought it, all scientists think it.
Yeah, he is the Pope of science. It's true. Haynes is correct to point out that Cladistics was developed as a purely evolutionary taxonomic system that assumes universal common descent. True. However, it is an overreach to claim that, due to its origins in evolutionary studies, Cladistics is always and invariably unbiblical. That would be the genetic fallacy, and it is indeed a fallacy, right? The source of an information taints the information itself. It doesn't work that way. For instance, just because Ken Ham says it doesn't mean it's wrong. Now, statistically, if you're just going statistically, yeah, there's a pretty good chance.
Statistically.
But logically, technically, things aren't wrong because Ken Ham says them. It's just he says a lot of wrong things. After all, cladistics is simply a method of hierarchically arranging organisms, individuals, species, genera, and so on by plotting them on trees based on the proportions of how similar their characteristics are. It's more than that, right? It's the pattern of similarities and differences that are important. It's not just how similar they are. That would just get you like a ladder type arrangement. When we use this method to investigate actual biological descent and relatedness as creationists, then the method should be restricted to questions of ancestry within created kinds rather than between them. Now, that's an interesting thing, right? Because, like I've said, when you read a Baraminology paper, it's literally just a cladistics paper using somewhat old-fashioned methods from like the 1950s. But the key thing that they do is because they don't think that there's common ancestry, and they're trying to demonstrate that, they tend not to include everything an actual cladist would probably include. Right? So if you're like, I want to see if horses are in the same kind as... Well, horses are probably a bad example. What's a better example? We'll go with Arctoidea, right? Are procyonids and ursids, so that's the raccoons and kinkajous and those things from South America primarily, except for the raccoon, which, you know, is all over the place. It's now actually causing problems in the Iberian Peninsula because idiots had raccoons as pets in Spain And then they realize what a bad idea that is, so they release them. So now, yeah, there's raccoons running around.
Brain's real great at making decisions about stuff.
Right? So anyway, and then ursids are, of course, the bears, right? Now, these are actually very closely related organisms under evolutionary understanding. They're both omnivorous carnivorans. They are both plantigrade. They both are really good at climbing trees. They have a lot of the same adaptations to a lot of these behaviors. Very close related. So what a baraminologist might do is say, okay, well, we've got all the procyonids that we can find, and all the ursids that we can find, and our outgroup is going to be, and then you'll pick something like, I don't know, like a dog, right? We'll say it's the golden jackal, Canis aureus. That's our outgroup. Okay, well, that's interesting, and you will probably get enough difference between the ursids and the procyonids to put them in separate categories. But the problem then is, well, what if you also include, say, the mustelids and the mephidids, which is basically just the skunk, and also the pinnipeds, so, you know, like the seals. So that's, mustelids are like weasels, ferrets, stoats, badgers, wolverines. Pinnipeds are seals, sea lions, walruses, and like I said, mephidids are a sister group to the weasels and whatnot. They're just skunks, basically. If you include all of those, suddenly there isn't this great distance between all the groups. They actually fall into a nested hierarchy that connects all of them. But what baraminologists do is just don't include them, because you're already assuming.
Just ignore it.
Yeah, just don't worry about that. Which,
yeah, just don't worry about it.
I mean, I guess, but the problem is that when other people, non-creationists, then go in and use baraminology but don't exclude everything, they prove things that creationists don't like. Like, there is a, I wish I remembered who did it, but there was a quote-unquote paper in baraminology that used baraminology techniques to recover humans as part of the ape baramin, right? Because there's enough to connect them all, and if you use a wide enough sample, suddenly humans fall right in line with the rest of the hominids. So, yeah. Okay, such applications are non-controversial among young Earth creationists. I mean, that's not true, right? They are controversial because you're currently stepping in the controversy. For example,
yes, you're perpetuating the controversy.
Right. Like, the fact that Haynes, as well as Harry F. Sanders, and largely Answers in Genesis, is getting, like, starting to poo-poo baraminology means that there's a controversy. For example, cladistic methods are employed by Jeanson in 2022 in his approach to tracing genetic signatures of the Y chromosome among humans. Yes, that's true. That is true. He is using those same kind of techniques. Jeanson builds a cladistic tree of genetic ancestry going back to Noah's 3 sons. Well, he pretends that that's what he's done. In order to do that, he has to unroot his tree so that it looks like that's what's happening. But once you root that tree in any way, oh no, suddenly it didn't work anymore.
Yes.
Well, and throw out the Neanderthals as well.
Oh yeah, you do have to throw out the Neanderthals.
Can't include them, or all of a sudden you can't find Noah.
Yeah, he has to do a lot of. Well, it's the same thing with all the other baraminology work, right? You have to throw out data to make it work. If you include all the relevant data, it stops working and it just aligns with evolution. Jeanson builds a cladistic tree of genetic ancestry going back to Noah's 3 sons and fits genetic haplotypes of extant Homo sapiens onto its branches. Yep. Thus, the objection is not to cladistics per se, but to its application in generally generating hypotheses that posit common ancestry among separately created kinds, which you can't figure out what those are without doing the cladistics, but once you do it with all the data, suddenly there are no separately created kinds. Sorry, guys. Like all other young Earth creationists, we reject such applications as inappropriate uses of cladistic methods. Great. I'm sure the cladists are really concerned what Matt McLean is complaining about.
Yeah.
These issues of nature and applicability of taxonomic schemes are important. All right, I'm kind of tired of reading about the cladistics and baraminology, so we're going to go ahead a little bit because I'm going to open up. If anyone else has, Vishanti or Dr. Joff, I mean, not anyone, but if either of you have anything else that you want to say about baraminology, how it works, any problems with it, or anything else like that, go ahead, and I'm going to start scrolling down.
It's full of problems, and it's nonsense, pure and utter nonsense.
Yeah.
I do cladistics, and I find this boring, so let's move on.
Yeah. All right, dinosaurs and birds, here we are. So, yeah, I think we've covered, look, like I said, this is linked in the pinned comment. You can read the URL right here. You can just search for it. If you want to read the entire discussion about cladistics, feel free. I don't want to. Savage Monkey Fish Cobra says Nathaniel Jeanson is the Richard Carrier of genetics. Jeez.
Oh,
Uh,
ouch.
yeah, I don't know if you've noticed, Dr. Duff, but Richard Carrier has become a meme on the channel.
Yeah, it's
Because this is not a
Deservedly so.
we do not stand Richard Carrier here at Dapper Dinosaur. At any time, taxonomic definitions are specific and based on empirical data. Yes. They're also subject to revision because taxonomy is an active scientific discipline whose findings are tentative. Also, yes. This was true for Linnaeus, as noted above. When it became apparent that whales were air-breathing mammals, he changed their taxonomic location from Pisces to Mammalia, Linnaeus 1806. Yes, he did. This is thus it is no surprise that taxonomic definitions for terms like dinosaur and bird have been revised frequently over time, and we therefore cannot agree with Haynes' claim that cladistic terms and definitions are used in a very subjective and arbitrary way. Haynes 2022. Rather, taxonomic definitions are precise and accurate given the state of knowledge at the time. Yes, that is an important thing to point out. There is, if you look up any taxon except for a few like waste bin taxa that still exist, you will find rigorous definitions, but those might end up being subject to change, right? So, for instance,
It's almost like we change when we learn new stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't believe. Isn't that how science do?
Normally, yes, that is how science do.
I thought this was a great line. I was really glad to see this here.
Yeah, no, this part of the paper is great.
Yeah, I've named families, I've named genera, reclassified a whole order of plants that almost none of you've ever heard of. And at the time, I would say that it was the most rigorous understanding at that point. I revised other people's work, split species, combined things into a new family. And since then, more people have done more sequences, sequenced the whole genome, found new species, and that has caused some changes in the classification. And I don't say like, well, boo-hoo for me. I'd say that's great. We found out more and we revised it and advanced the knowledge of that particular course, of that particular class.
Dr. Duff, are you saying that you are not the king of botany?
Cladistics?
And cladistics and botany?
No, I used to be the king of hornworts. Like the anthracotes, which are a form of bryophyte.
Oh,
non-vascular plant.
I like bryophytes because everyone forgets about them.
Yeah, so I classified a whole bunch. Well, actually, almost every North American species.
I just realized I'm like a biology hipster. I specifically like bryophytes because they're not popular.
Biology hipster. Name 3 of their albums.
I'm glad you know what a bryophyte is.
Yeah.
Do you know what a liverwort? Do you know what a liverwort is?
I mean, I couldn't give you the technical definition, but I could probably describe, like the low-lying things with the flat.
Out.
Yeah, I could out of a lineup.
Yeah, you could pick one out. You could compare it. You could tell the difference between a moss and a liverwort.
Oh yeah, easily.
The hornworts are the rare group.
Okay.
And there's again in science, there was at my time when I was working on these, there's a big debate about which was the first land plant, which of those 3 different groups. Hornworts, liverworts, or mosses. And I was working with a group that was very passionate about one particular explanation, and there were different groups that had different ideas, and it was like a constant battle, constantly publishing papers. And most of that's been resolved, and I don't think any of us hate each other. Some of us are disappointed that we weren't the winners, that we weren't right, but we had a hypothesis, so we threw it out there, and further data suggested that the other hypothesis was better. I'm totally cool with that.
Most hypotheses turn out to be wrong because there's way more ways to be wrong than there are ways to be right.
Yeah.
But along the way,
this is one thing that Joel Duff actually has, this thing called integrity.
What's that?
Like when your hypothesis doesn't bear out, like, yeah, it's a bummer, but you're like, well, that's where the data didn't go, so let's go back and try another one.
Yeah, and along the way, we learned a lot of new things. And as Dapper pointed out, sometimes you're collecting data, you don't even know what it means, you don't know what it might be used for in the future. And then somebody else comes along and takes that data and all of a sudden they find a new pattern from that. And they have a new explanation that informs, brings together a whole bunch of new ideas into a better package that didn't exist before. So I'm just hoping somebody names a plant after me someday.
That'd be nice.
That's all I want. I am a little selfish, and it's like, I put a lot of time into those plants. So
Yeah.
surely there's some new species out there we haven't been identified yet, and if they need a last Latin name, the Duffii would be just fine.
That would be pretty cool. And yes, by the way, you are not supposed to name things after yourself in taxonomy.
Yes,
that
right.
is
That's
not
cool.
okay. No. That's why we have like 5 different animals named after Barack Obama, but like none of them are named after the researcher who found them. So
Yeah.
and just different versions of Barack Obama as a name for an organism. There's like 2 different spiders or something are named that, and like it's kind of weird. Anyway, the central to the debate over feathers and dinosaurs then are the definitions of feather and dinosaur. Yes, this is the one thing that every time I've ever debated a creationist on the feathers and dinosaurs and bird thing, they never bother with. Like, why would I need to define dinosaur? I don't know, because you're trying to argue that something isn't one. If you don't know what the thing is, you can't tell me that something else isn't part of that thing, right? It's like, I just don't get it. It's like trying to say that, well, I don't think baseball is a sport. Well, what's your definition of sport? Well, I don't know, but it's not baseball. Oh, okay.
Well, I'm not going to tell you that. You're just trying to trick me.
Like, okay. What? And then you're like, well, in baseball, they use a bat and bases, and that doesn't happen in any other sport, so it's clearly not a sport. I'm like, well, I don't see how that argument follows.
Okay.
Any definition for feathers must include details about their structure and composition. Zhu and Guo, 2009, 321. By the way, I am not even going to attempt to figure out what the proper tones are for these Chinese names. So if you are a Chinese speaker, don't at me. Sorry. It's just not going to happen. At least not today. Define modern feathers as complex integumentary appendages formed from hierarchical branches of rachis, barbs, and barbules, which are composed of phykeratins and grow from a follicle. The only thing I'm going to add to that is that phykeratins are a subset of beta keratins, and they are related to the much simpler alpha keratins that form mammal fur. So, there you go. Modern feathers even include 7 different forms, including pennaceous types, flight, tail, contour, and semiplume, filamentous down, phyloplume, and bristles, figures 1 and 2, which we'll get to. There are even some bizarre feather types like the keratinous quills found on the wings of cassowaries, and in place of the remiges. Remiges are those flight feathers that kind of define the contour of a wing. That's what those are. And I think we'll actually get a picture of the little spiky bits that cassowaries have instead. Let's see. McLean, Patron, and Spites.
Mary. I think that's how I'm supposed to say that.
Oh.
Fishbody 2023. I'm not sure how to articulate my own inarticulate frustration.
McLean, Patron, and Spites detail the various types of feathers found in fossil birds and dinosaurs, and here we get a little diagram. So 1 and 2, we have symmetrical flight feathers, 3 was a contour feather, 4 is a phyloplume, 5 is a semiplume, and 6 is downy feather, not illustrated as the bristle from the cassowaries. And these are just the kinds of feathers that you find in modern birds. So for instance, 1 would be a fairly common thing on, say, the tail of a bird. 2 would be a pretty common thing on the wings. 3 is just covering most of the body. 4 are actually sensory feathers, and they are basically placed all over the body, and they not only can they sense things like pressure or wind, but they can also tell the bird where its feathers are, because feathers actually have muscles that can control them so that they can stand up and, ruffle and whatnot. And so the phyloplumes actually give the bird information as to where the contour and flight feathers actually are in relation to the rest of the body. 5 is a semiplume. They're used for a lot of different reasons. They can be used for insulation. There's a bunch of things. And downy feather is what is typically growing on baby birds as their first few feathers. And it's primarily an insulation thing. Like when a chick hatches from an egg, like a chicken chick, and it's all fluffy and yellow, those are downy feathers. So, let's see. Here we have a close-up of green barbet, which those are great birds. By the way, green barbets, really cool. Display elongate bare bristle feathers, protecting from the beak. These are basically whiskers, the bird version of whiskers, right? These are sensory organs that are feeding information about what's going on near the face to the bird for purposes of like food acquisition, even navigation, things like that. And here are the bristles, these things that look like kind of like claws coming out here. Those are the bristles of a cassowary. They are stiff, relatively thick, and They're technically feathers because they do grow from the same follicles that feathers do, but they're radically simplified. And in fact, one of the things that they don't point out is actually that the scales that you see on bird feet are actually themselves also feathers that are essentially stunted. So one of the interesting things is that bird scales are actually feathers, and it actually only takes a very few mutations to make them go from being scales to being feathers. In fact, there are certain breeds of chicken where that is the normal state for that breed, is that instead of scales, they have feathers on their feet. And yes, it does make it a little bit difficult for them to walk, but they do okay. Mostly because humans feed them, so they don't have to worry about it too much. A dinosaur is an archosaurian group characterized by a variety of skeletal traits possessed by its members. These include, but are not limited to, and this is from Nesbitt 2011, epipophyses, there you go, on the postaxial anterior cervical vertebrae. These are just projections from the vertebrae. We're not going to get into it too in detail. A deltoid pectoral crest located 30% or further down the length of the humerus. That is just a muscle attachment site. The radius is shorter than 80% of the humerus length. Perforated acetabulum, we talk about that a lot on this channel. A fourth trochanter is a sharp flange. Also, it's asymmetrical. There's other stuff, right? I could add a whole bunch to this. But yeah, these are, in fact, various characteristics of dinosaurs. Nesbitt 2011 identifies a total of 12 dinosaur unique traits and 13 additional traits that may also qualify, Haynes 2022. Beyond these, there are also other traits that are characteristic of dinosaurs but are also shared with similar non-dinosaurian groups, for example, silosaurids, or are nearly but not completely found among all dinosaurian taxa. For example, dinosaurs typically have 3 or more few sacral vertebrae, stand with their limbs directly under their bodies, and possess an astragalus that extends over the distal anterior surface of the tibia. All of the above are anatomical features, plus additional ones, are the means by which paleontologists can identify whether an organism is or is not a dinosaur. Now, okay, to my panel members, would you say that birds have all these characteristics, or no?
I'd answer that question if I actually knew, but I'm not familiar enough with the. Oh, well, what is a bird? See, I was actually thinking about.
Let's say crown birds.
I was thinking about Archaeopteryx.
Let's say crown birds.
I would.
So that's all the birds that are alive now and their common ancestor and all the descendants of that common ancestor.
Can I guess no?
You can guess whatever you want. You can guess 4.
Well, I could be wrong. Yes.
Yeah. What do you think, Vishanti?
I'll guess yes, just so it's even.
All right. Actually, Vishanti is right on this one. Birds actually meet all the anatomical definitions for dinosaurs. There is not a thing that makes a dinosaur that birds don't have. Vandalia 1998 for $5 says, so then no new species or genera or higher depending where ceratosaurs are on the clay tree named Dapper, I guess then. Not if I name them. If someone else wants to name a dinosaur after me, they can, but I can't do it. So
Dapper, when you say there's nothing the crown bird has that a dinosaur doesn't,
no, other way around. There's nothing that makes a dinosaur that crown birds don't have.
I see. That is common to all dinosaurs.
Yeah.
That birds don't also have. Gotcha.
Yeah, so these are synapomorphies, basically, in the evolutionary jargon, right? They're shared characteristics that are inherited by this group that share a common ancestor. And birds have all the synapomorphies that make them dinosaurs. Within the group of birds, these are plesiomorphic, right? Because they're shared by a whole wider group. But these plesiomorphic characters are also synapomorphic for Dinosauria as a whole. And so plesiomorphic characteristics are things that are shared by a group of organisms, but are also shared by other groups of organisms that share a common ancestor farther back than the common ancestor of that group that's under consideration. Those are plesiomorphic. These synapomorphies are characteristics that are only shared by the descendants of this particular common ancestor that would have also had them. Anyway, here are in some cases.
Just for the audience, we talked about teeth earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So the loss of teeth is a characteristic that's plesiomorphic across all crown birds.
Right.
But it's not a unique characteristic to dinosaurs because other organisms have it as well.
Yeah.
So these are characteristics that are unique to dinosaurs and everything that's within that group.
Yes. All of the above anatomical features plus additional ones are the means by which paleontologists can identify whether an organism is or is not a dinosaur. Correct. Ken Tovind, take notes. Maybe if you're going to call yourself Dr. Dino, you should look up what a dinosaur is at some point. The features, I still can't believe that he's just never thought about that. To this day, years later, I'm still baffled by that. The features observed that further define specific dinosaur groups, genera, and species are similarly and increasingly precise. In some cases, a taxon may lack some of the features, but is still considered a dinosaur on the basis of possessing many of the other traits. So that's something that's important. For instance, I'll use another example. Snakes are tetrapods. Now, one of the characteristics of tetrapods is having 4 limbs. Most snakes have no limbs, and some snakes have 2 limbs. But they're still tetrapods. And in fact, they have 4 limbs in utero. Embryonic snakes, at some point, develop 4 limb buds. Strawberry Vein, for $5, says, this is the dumbest hill that creationists will die on. Yeah, it's a really weird hill for them to die on. I don't get it. It's just like dying on the hill that whales are actually fish. Like, why? Why would you do that? This is not unusual this is not unusual in biology. For instance, all biologists consider snakes to be in tetrapod. Oh, that's exactly what I was using. Okay. Even though they have no legs. Well, I would argue that some of them have 2 legs, but whatever. Rather, the myriad of reptilian traits that snakes possess supersedes their limbless condition. Yes, also they're not always limbless, because again, they do have limbs in embryo. In contrast to the rigorous anatomical details noted above, Haynes' approach to definition issues is muddled. Yes,
That's polite.
Yes, I do appreciate how understated this is. I'm someone who likes to be understated in many cases. And yeah. First, Haynes claims that bird is defined as those organisms, quote, having actual modern-looking feathers, unquote, which what exactly is meant by this is unclear. Yes, it's very unclear. There's so many different kinds of modern-looking feathers, and how modern does it have to look before it counts as modern-looking? I just don't know.
And they have to be actual ones, too.
Yeah, they can't just be collagen fibers that are misidentified as such.
Oh, of course not. Of course not.
As mentioned above, there are 7 distinct types of feathers known among extant birds, ranging from simple bristles to asymmetrical flight feathers, and therefore all of these qualify as modern-looking feathers. Yes! Yes, those crazy little bristles that look like porcupine quills on a cassowary are feathers. So I guess that means that, like, Tian Yu Long, which is a heterodontosaurid, a plant-eating dinosaur that is about as far away from birds as you can possibly get while still being a dinosaur. By golly, that's a bird. At this point, it's just birds just become pretty much all of Dinosauria. Haynes states that if the feather is defined as filaments, then they appear in basal coelurosaurs such as Sinosauropteryx. Yes, that's true. Sinosauropteryx should be a bird by this definition, which I would reject, by the way. I do not think it is reasonable to call Sinosauropteryx prima a bird. It would seem that her definition would demand reclassifying substantial members of theropod dinosaurs, including Tyrannosauria, Compsognathidae, and others, as birds. We do not believe this is Haynes' intention. It's definitely not. And invite her to clarify whether A, the filamentous integument seen in Sinosauropteryx, Eutyrannus, and other Coelurosaurian theropods is homologous to feathers or not, and B, if so, by what other characteristics should bird be defined? And yeah, that's a great question, right? And they're understating the problem here. If you're just going to go with anything that looks like a modern feather that we have, it's not just Coelurosauria. It's a huge swath of dinosaurs, including the ceratopsians. We have known proto-feathers in ceratopsians, right? So, is Triceratops a bird? I mean, I don't think so. That seems like a kind of crazy option.
Second, and potentially outside of dinosaurs, pterosaurs.
I need a snack.
Yeah. Oh, all right. We will take a quick break. We will be right back after that. And I'm going to get myself another cup of coffee, I think. So we will be back in just a few minutes. And in the meantime, please enjoy the musical stylings of one Bent Hovend, the better Hovend, the best Hovend. Okay, we are back. Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to go through a quick version of the normal after break bit, which is to say, hey, this channel is almost entirely supported through the direct support that you guys give, so I really appreciate that. If you're currently not someone who's supporting, you're interested in supporting the channel financially, best way is to either join the channel membership or the Patreon. I get to keep a little bit more with the Patreon, but it's really not that big of a deal either way. You can go annual on the Patreon or monthly. Annual gets you a 15% discount. So yeah, you can be a member for like an entire year on Patreon for less than $11. Either way, you get access to early access for like 5 months worth of videos. It's hours and hours of content. You can get in a Discord server that's just for people who are financially supporting the channel. If that's not your thing, there's also a merch store linked in the description. And also, if you just don't want to or you can't afford to help out financially at all, perfectly fine. Like the videos, watch the videos, and importantly, share them. Share them. Less than 1% of the people watching my videos share my videos. I can tell because I get a report from YouTube weekly about how many people watch and how many people share. And it's always less than 1%. So please help me out. Savage Monkeyfish Cobra just gifted 5 Dapper Dinosaur memberships. They went to Nimaz, Chesh, Maya Adkison, Cindy Bidwell Glaze, and The Fallen. Thank you very much. All right, here we go. Second, if only Panaceous feathers qualify as sufficiently, quote, modern looking, then Haynes' mention of their presence in Maniraptoran dinosaurs would require these dinosaurs to be birds. Maniraptora non-controversially includes Alvarosauroidea, which, interestingly, now, don't we have Ken Hamez on record saying that Alvarosaurids are birds, Dr. Duff? Didn't you do a video on that recently?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Even though it's listed at the Ark Encounter as a dinosaur.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Therizzinosauria. So that's Therizinosaurus, Dinochirus. They're actually going to describe them later. I'm not going to go into it. Oviraptorosauria. So you probably know Oviraptor. It was in the Disney dinosaur movie for one thing. Troodontidae and Dromaeosauridae, that's the raptors. And Scansoriopterigidae, which is something you probably aren't aware of. Dr. Duff, have you heard of the Scansoriopterigids?
No.
What about you, Vishanti?
I have no idea. What are they?
All right, so Scansoriopterigidae is this very strange group of Maniraptorans who have like a different wing structure than we get in birds. They have a spike of bone coming out from their wrist. It's not clear what it's homologous to. Like, is it a dermal bone? Is it actually a carpal? Like, we're not sure, right? And it supports a membranous wing membrane, much more like a bat's than a bird's. And they have only a few teeth right at the front of their jaw. They're relatively small. Most of them are about like the size of a crow or so. And they're really only found in certain parts of China. They're a very, very unusual group. The dinosaur genus Yi is probably the most famous Scansoriopterigid, but we know of others. Sometimes Yi, unlike most other dinosaurs, but like Tyrannosaurus rex, is often known by both species and genus name. So Yi-Chi, spelled Y-I space Q-I. That's how you spell that, Yi-Chi, because it's Chinese. Clear Pinnae, actually, it would be Yi-Chi, because the Y followed by an I in Pinyin actually ends up saying E, but whatever, everyone says Yi-Chi in English, so I'm just going to stick with it. Anyway, clear pinnaceous feathers have been found in each of these groups, save Alvarosauroidea and Therizzinosauria, whose members display more tuft-like feathers. Additionally, the Ornithomimosauria contains members with pinnaceous feathers. Yep, so Ornithomimosauria, that's like Gallimimus, Ornithomimus, Struthiomimus. If you remember Jurassic Park, the bird, or there, I just did it. The dinosaurs that Dr. Grant is so amazed, like, oh, they're flocking just like birds. And then, a T-Rex pops out of the forest and chomps down on one. Yeah. That's the dinosaurs we're talking about here. I love that scene, by the way. It's just so great. And also, Tyrannosaurus rex and various ornithomimids would have overlapped both temporally and spatially, so it is actually scientifically accurate to have T-Rex preying on ornithomimids. Cool. Yeah, there's actually, so far as I know, currently unnamed ornithomimid known from Hell Creek, which is one of the areas where we find the most Tyrannosaurus material. So they were contemporaries in the same place in the same time, yeah. Let's see. Additionally, the Ornithomimosauria, yep. So we can broaden the range of dinosaurs with such traits to the larger group called Maniraptor Ornithopteriformes, which equals Ornithomimosauria plus Maniraptora. Yep. Calling these dinosaurs birds merely because they possess pennaceous feathers and or tufted feathers would go far beyond what any evolutionist has argued. Yeah, way beyond. No one is arguing that, like, well, except for Ken Ham, I guess, is arguing that, like, Alvarezsaurids or Ornithomimids are birds. For example, Therizinosaurus is a 10-meter-long, ponderous, herbivorous theropod with enormous scythe-like claws, and is a close relative of Bapiosaurus. And its close relative, Bapiosaurus, displays feather-like integument with identifiable melanosomes. Li et al. 2014, Zhu Zhang, and Yu 2009. These lumbering beasts cannot be considered birds in any reasonable taxonomy. No, I agree. I 100% agree. Likewise, the medium and large-sized sickle-clawed dromaeosaurids display ample evidence of feathers. This includes the presence of quill knobs, ulnar papillae, on the forearms of Velociraptor and specimens currently referred to Dakotaraptor, which, yes, may be an invalid taxon. We're not going to get into that right now, but yeah, Dakotaraptor may or may not be a thing. And pennaceous feather impressions along the arms and tail like Genuine long. None of these animals would be called birds by taxonomists because because possessing feathers does not by itself define birds. Although interestingly, Answers in Genesis, rather famously in my book at least, classifies Microraptor as a bird, despite being in the same family as Velociraptor, which they identify as a dinosaur. Which is, I mean, it would be like finding like a new species of canid and then just deciding, okay, no, actually, that right there, it's not a mammal. Now, I know it's in the same family as like the wolf and, you know, the jackal and the coyote and the fox, but actually, this is a reptile. You're just like, what are you talking about?
What?
How can it be a reptile? It's a dog. So, yeah. So how are birds defined? As Haynes notes in her paper, there are numerous definitions of aves and aviale. I'm going to say I personally don't like calling things outside of aves birds, but I get that most people start calling things birds around aviale, and I'm not going to correct people who do. I just don't like it, so it's a personal thing for me. While the term aviale is applied to animals beginning with or near Archaeopteryx, and is inclusive of a wide array of non-modern fossil bird groups, such as modern birds. While we are not advocating for a phylogenetic definition, as they are evolutionary in their construction, true, it is important to recognize that neither aves nor aviale are defined solely on the basis of possessing feathers, because 1, feathers are known in numerous non-modern bird fossils classified outside of aves, and 2, feathers are known among numerous dinosaurian taxa classified outside of aviale. Yes, that is very true. Haynes, however, makes the following claim. The presence of feathers is not the only characteristic, but one of the main ones, because feathers are central to the definition of aves, sick. I think the sick is there just because it's not capitalized. Which, by the way, is another point that I made. You know, the editing here at the ARJ really needs some work. Just from a formatting, grammar, capitalization standpoint. It, like, Andrew Snelling, I know you're probably not watching. But, like, dude, step it up, man. Come on. Like, you're the one who's in charge of this, right? The buck stops at your desk. Although, maybe he is watching.
He can start by editing his own papers.
Yeah.
Actually, there was a
Those
period.
50 to 60 page monstrosities.
Oof. There was actually a period where if you went onto, like, a signed out or, like, incognito window and you went to YouTube and you searched Andrew Snelling, my compilation of him being a liar was the first thing that came up for a while. I hope he noticed that and hated it. Yeah, imagine searching your own name on YouTube and the first thing that comes up is someone just calling you a liar for 3 hours. With receipts to back it up, too.
Yep.
First, those published prior to the discovery of the feathered fossil taxa beginning in the 1990s cannot adjudicate their current situation. Yes, yeah, so Haynes relied on some pretty old citations, right? She was working on, like, 1980s, 1990s stuff. And it's like, okay, great. In the 1990s and 1980s, sure, there was not as much information now about the status of feathers. Second and more troubling is that Bush argued precisely the opposite of Haynes' claim, agreeing that Proto-Archaeopteryx and Caudipteryx were dinosaurs with essentially modern contour and primary feathers, and that feathers on these specimens are symmetrical primaries and semi-plume feather types. Bush's writings contemporary with Haynes' citation are emphatic that feathers are not restricted to aves. Yeah, that's another thing. I didn't really go into it a lot in our stream that we did about the original paper, mostly because, I mean, look, I don't have time on a live stream to look up every single one of her citations, right? But it's not just Linnaeus that she seems to have either just completely misunderstood or to be lying about. And it's hard for me to say that she completely misunderstood it because, like, toothless is not a hard word to figure out, even if English is your second language, right? Like, she's more or less fluent in English. She should know what toothless means. Heck, it's the name of a cartoon character that's named that because it doesn't seem to have teeth.
Yeah.
So yeah, in a number of cases, she just cites people to suggest that their work supports her, when in fact they have the opposite conclusion that she does. It's very strange, right? This brings us to a curious situation, because with clear evidence of feathers on certain dinosaur fossils, a number of young Earth creationist authors have advocated for reclassifying these taxa as birds. We find these assignments to be biologically inconsistent, as they frequently separate members of the same taxonomic family, yes, into both dinosaur and bird categories. Oh, here it is. For example, Clary, 2015, classifies Microraptor as a bird, while other Dromaeosaurs remain dinosaurs, and also classifies Scansoriopteryx as a bird. Thomas and Sarfati likewise raise questions concerning Microraptor's status as a dinosaur, and they further suggest that Caudipteryx and perhaps all other Oviraptorosauria might be reassigned to birds. Sir Hadi, Thomas, and Tay, 2020, consider Caudipteryx a bird, even while their analysis clustered it with Incisivosaurus, there you go, another Oviraptorid, which they consider a dinosaur. Goodness. Oh, this is so chaotic.
These folks just live in the moment. They see a piece of evidence and they have to try to provide the answer, because their answer is in Genesis, right?
Yep.
And their audience expects them to give them an answer that day. And what can they say? You know, it's like, I literally think they can't even remember what they've said 5 iterations prior, and keep track of all this in their own minds.
Alex,
some of us know their literature better than they do.
It's not hard to do.
Yeah.
It's really not that hard to know it better than they do, because they seem to have almost no awareness of anything that came before them unless it's currently actively useful to them right now.
Yeah.
Also, Alex Markle says, Dapper, you can't tell me you would look at an antiornithine and not call it a bird. I can tell you that, because I have, and I will, and I do. I mean, look, you don't have to agree with me, right? You can call an antiornithines birds, and I'm not going to complain about that. I don't like to do it. And that's a me thing.
I gotta know, what do you think of, you just want to put aves as birds?
Yeah, basically crown birds. Yep. If it's not a crown bird, I'm probably not going to call it a bird.
All right.
I might call it a stem bird, which, I mean, technically includes, pterosaurs, but, or I'll actually use the actual cladistic definitions, right? Like I'll say that this is a pyhostylian or an avialan or Penaraptoran or something like that, right? And that's just a me thing, right? That's a weird quirk that I have, and I recognize that it's not common, it's not standard. You don't have to do it. I'm not going to complain if you do. Sir Hadi Thomas and Tay, 2020, consider Caudipteryx as a bird. Yep, okay, we already got that. Sarfati and Tay, 2022, assigned Microraptor, Anchiornis, and Caudipteryx to birds, but not other members of Dromaeosauridae, Troodontidae, or Oviraptorosauria. Yeah. That's the crazy thing. It really is like pointing and saying, oh, you know what? The tanuki, the raccoon dog, that's everyone thinks is a canid, actually a snake. Oh, okay, sure, why not, right? Let's just...
Alrighty.
Sure. The most conspicuous example comes from Menton. Oh, goodness.
Oh, boy.
Oh,
I'm familiar with this. 2018, who separated 2 skeletons of the same species, Ornithomimus edmontonicus, into dinosaur and bird based on pictures of their museum displays. I cannot express to you how insane that is that ever happened. First of all, you don't do science based on museum displays. Museum displays show you the conclusions of various hypotheses. Science is done on fossils, not museum displays, right? Those are reconstructions that are at least partially not skeptical, what am I thinking of? Speculative, that's the word, right? And you look at the same dinosaur in two different pictures and decide that one is a bird and one isn't. And it's the same species. And the thing is, Harry F. Sanders has done this too. In one of his Emery Moina videos that I responded to, where he's trying to figure out if things are dinosaurs or birds, he did the same thing with Ornithomimus edmontonicus. He looked at two different pictures and said one was a dinosaur and one was a bird, except they weren't different museum displays. They were the same museum display pictured at different angles. And based on the angle of the same museum display, this man said one was a dinosaur and the other one was a bird.
Wow, I missed that. That is great.
It takes Menton and it just blows right past how crazy that is. Man, and he was like, I think these are actually just different specimens of different species. And it's like, dude, it's the same display. I found all the pictures. They're the same mount of the same skeleton in the same museum in the same display box. It's the same one skeleton. These claims are anatomically untenable. Yeah, that's one way to put it. Yeah, I'll say. Descriptive paleontology is rigorous and precise. Yes, it is. Hey, Mark Armitage, a man who published a paper about Triceratops horns, allegedly, in Acta Histochemica, a microscopy journal. Dude, you're supposed to do things like actually take measurements, have more than one overshadowed in situ photograph of your find. You're supposed to actually do an analysis. Like you said, oh, hey, we found a Triceratops rib too. And then you don't describe it. And I looked at your picture of the rib, and it looked more like a mammal rib than a Triceratops rib. Dinosaur ribs are actually pretty distinctive. It didn't look like a dinosaur rib. But then again, I don't know, because you only had one picture of it with you're just holding it in your hand. It's like, this is a Triceratops rib. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe. Sorry, I'm just dunking on Mark Armitage because anytime I can dunk on Mark Armitage's work, I will dunk on Mark Armitage's work because it's trash. Let's see. So yeah, descriptive paleontology requires... it seems quite unlikely that well-trained paleontologists and comparative anatomists have mistakenly placed animals from two different classes into the same families or even species. Yeah, it seems really, really unlikely.
Wow.
I mean, think about that. It's like walking outside and finding a lizard and a mouse. And you're like, yeah, these are probably the same species. I mean, they're both small, they both have tails, they both have teeth, they got 4 legs, same thing. And that's the thing that Haynes thinks is happening right now, is that paleontologists are out there just doing that. Savage Monkeyfish Cobra says, the rare ceratopsian Triceratops latifrons. Yeah, as if the world isn't just lousy with Triceratops latifrons. And the thing is, also Mark Armitage did not put a sitemap in. And you need a sitemap. If you're doing paleontology, archaeology, or geology, you need a sitemap. It is not optional. You must include a sitemap. He didn't. And the thing is that the place he was digging isn't even open to the public. It's a private ranch that only lets young earth creationists dig there. But also, if you look at the geology of the area, it also has Pleistocene sediments, which Pleistocene sediments in that area are known to contain bison latifrons, which is the joke that Savage Cobra is making. Strawberry Man for $5 says, but Dapper, don't you know, looks like. That's the whole scientific method. Oh my goodness, yeah.
Yes.
What
it looks like.
I just finished a second video. It's up for early access now, but it's about Roger from Mud Fossil U, and that is his entire thing. He's like, this picture from a satellite kind of makes me think of a snake. So therefore, large portions of North America are actually the body fossil of a giant snake. And it's just like, what? Jessica, just join the channel at the amulet level. Everyone, send some tetrapods and some sessile, not pelagic tunicates to welcome Jessica.
No, pelagic.
No,
sorry.
Sessile.
Not sorry.
Good, honest, hardworking, patriotic, God-fearing sessile tunicates. They might be from the Netherlands. It's okay to be from the Netherlands. There's nothing wrong with the Netherlands. Well, okay, there might currently be something wrong with the Netherlands given their most recent elections. So I don't know. Yeah, I was not expecting Geert Wilders' party to get the plurality of votes in the national level elections. So that was That was unexpected. I don't actually expect him to end up being the prime minister. For one thing, I actually think that the monarch of the Netherlands still has veto power over who the PM is. Descriptive, yeah, okay, blah, blah, blah. In the species, the various proposals mentioned above lack the kind of methodical skeletal assessments that are necessary to make the rigorous anatomical argument. The sole unifying factor among them is the underlying assumption that any animal possessing feathers is, by definition, a bird. Which, I mean, you could make that definition. It's a consistent definition. It's just that no one does. When this assumption is removed, it becomes clear that numerous positively identified dinosaurs possess a wide range of feathers. Yes. Also, I want to point out, even if you define bird as animals that possess feathers, that does not remove birds from Dinosauria. It just means a larger group of dinosaurs are now birds. Okay, fine, right? It's like if I just change the definition of canid to just be the definition of like carnivoran, right? Well, okay, but that doesn't remove lions from carnivora, right? They're still carnivorans. They're just also now canids for some stupid reason. Finally, Haynes eschews a morphological definition of feathers, asserting that the feather means a complete and functional structure with no evolutionary stages, and that only birds are known to possess. What a definition! How do you use that definition? Dr. Duff, if you were to try to use that definition, could you? Because I can't think of a way. No, it's a completely useless definition. Especially the part where it's like, and that it has no evolutionary stages. I would argue that in that case, there is no such thing as a feather by that definition. There are two significant problems with this. First, when combined with the definition of a bird given earlier in the same paragraph, the two definitions become circular. Only birds possess feathers, and feathers are only found among birds. Yeah, it's a bit of a problem. Only birds have feathers. What are feathers? They're the thing birds have. Thanks.
Okay.
By defining... Wait, sorry. Alex Barkle says, if you can't move, you can't fear God, Dapper. Says who? Says who? I've met plenty, but I have definitely met theists who could not move on their own because of being in various ways paralyzed. Actually,
well, see, that's what you're implying by saying that the sessile tunicates are God-fearing.
Look, that they are God-fearing is like...
I'm just saying.
It's not caused by their sessile nature.
Alex, I picked up what you were laying down there.
All right. By defining feathers as structures possessed only by birds, Haynes prejudges the question of whether anatomically recognized dinosaurs could possess genuine feathers. Yes. Yeah, she has just defined birds not even out of Dinosauria, but just defined certain groups as birds by that fiat. Second, we are uncertain precisely what Haynes means by feather in this context. Yes, since her definition does not include a description of any anatomical features. Without a feather-specific information, including structure, composition, location, and development, we are left with nothing more than a biological structure unique to birds. This could include any number of features, such as the syrinx, the unique voice box that lets birds sing, or proximally fused metatarsals, mid-foot bones. Yeah, that's actually an interesting thing. Birds, their metatarsals, which are the bones that make up like the arch of your foot if you're a human, that all gets fused into one big thing, which then kind of like splits off into 4 sections to support the 4 toes for birds. It's very strange. It also happens in artiodactyls, like cattle. In those animals, they're called cannon bones. So if you ever hear of the cannon bone of a cow, that is the metacarpals, metacarpals and metatarsals that are fused. In birds, it's just the metatarsals that do this. We realize that this is not what Haynes intended to argue, but we raise the issue to demonstrate that a precise definition for feathers is a prerequisite for determining whether or not such structures are found among dinosaurs. I mean, yeah, it's a huge problem, and I didn't really harp on it in my original video, that she just doesn't define this. She's like, hey, everyone just knows what a feather is. Well, no, we don't, right?
No, we don't. Yeah, you can't make assumptions like that, especially when you're doing, like, science.
Exactly. And it like they brought up earlier with Sinosauropteryx, are those feathers? I can't tell what Haynes would say. I don't know. I mean, I know what I would say, which is that they're at least proto-feathers.
And what does she mean by no evolutionary stages? Is she talking about just moving from something that's not feather to feather? Or is she talking about one feather being able to become different types of feathers? Because not all birds have all these different types of feathers.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Does she expect, because I would assume she probably expects there's discontinuity between the different feather types, and so one feather type can't become another, in which case, what do you have to have? Do you have to have the whole package to be a bird? Have to have all different types of feathers, or is just having one type enough? That goes to your question, because what about pycnofibers or whatever?
Yeah.
Is that enough then to make you a bird? That's really the question.
Yeah. I mean, it really is that it could very well be the case that by Haynes's definition, pterosaurs are birds. We can't know because we don't have a way to assess on the basis of her definition whether or not pycnofibers count as feathers. They might. I don't think she would argue that pterosaurs are birds, but
I think she'll be tempted to go that direction. I think AIG might as well, because it also fits this whole biblical criteria of things that fly being created on a separate day than dinosaurs. The flying things created on the 5th day, the dinosaurs created on the 6th day. So therefore, there has to be discontinuity between those two, not just as different kinds, but as different created forms. I mean, just as overall body plans.
To which I
so
counter.
You have pterosaurs fly, well, then
Yeah.
they should be on the 5th day, in which case, no problem, them having some kind of feathery like things.
Of course, the obvious counter is then again bats and whales, which apparently should be created on day 5, but then the rest of mammals should have been created on day 6, right? So, are we going to now argue that no longer works? Like, what do we do with that?
Right, you got to take those out of mammals and classify them in another category.
Yeah, Cetacea and Chiroptera just become their own orders.
I mean, that's what they should do, but they're unwilling to go that far because I think they recognize the similarities, right? I mean, in other words, they can't deny the homology, and so they're fighting to find a way to have their cake and eat it too, but they're having neither.
Yep. Certain anatomical arguments are employed by Haynes in her claim that Archaeopteryx is best understood as a bird rather than a dinosaur. For instance, Haynes frequently states that Archaeopteryx possesses a pygostyle. Yes, she does. Which, no, it does not. She includes in this list, ostensibly from Wellenhofer 2009, of 8 features that Archaeopteryx share with dinosaurs, which is weird because most dinosaurs don't have a pygostyle, but all birds do. These claims are mistaken on 2 levels. First, a pygostyle is by definition composed of a short series of fused caudal tail vertebrae. A pygostyle is seen as the shortened bony tail of modern birds, yes, and some Mesozoic bird groups, for example, Confucius ornithoforms and Antiornithines, etc. They've got too many syllables in some of these names, which together comprise the group Pygostylia. Yep. In no way can the term pygostyle be applied to Archaeopteryx elongate tail, which consists of 21 to 23 unfused caudal vertebrae and most closely resembles the tail of Gehalornis and various Maniraptoran theropods. Again, very much yes. This is a great criticism, and spoiler alert, from what I can recall from having read the response to this response, she just doesn't touch this. Just doesn't seem to address the fact that she has no clue what a pygostyle is, despite writing a paper where that word is all over it. I mean, it's crazy, right? It's just like saying, well, humans have hooves. And it's like, well, what do you mean? And like, look at those toenails. Look at that toenail. That's a hoof. And it's like, no, it's not. Do you just not know what a hoof is?
If you're Lil Wayne with his socks on in the hot tub, you have hooves.
Oh, okay, maybe. Furthermore, nowhere in Wellenhofer is the list of 8 features presented by Haynes. There's another thing. Did Haynes actually read Wellenhofer? Or did she just put the name in there because it sounds like a good citation? It's
the latter.
Yeah. And here's the thing.
Yeah, I agree.
I would classify that as academic fraud. You are misrepresenting your own information as well as information of others. And it's hard to do that unconsciously. I can't see how that's a mistake. And the order of Wellenhofer's descriptive writing is also altogether different from the list provided by Haynes. Wellenhofer explores she really did just expect that no one was going to check. Right? She didn't even expect other young Earth creationists to check, but then they did. I honestly, if AIG were a normal academic institute, I think Gabriella Haynes would be fired by this point. I think this would be an unconscionable violation of various ethical codes that most academic institutes hold themselves to, right? Of honesty in academia. That's one of the most important things. It's the kind of thing that gets you expelled from school if you come even close to this. Wellenhofer explores in great detail how Archaeopteryx compares with theropods using the anatomical sequence employed by organismal biologists and paleontologists when describing a new species of vertebrate. A vertebrate skull and mandible, vertebral column, ribs and gastralia, pectoral girdle, forelimbs, pelvic girdle, and hind limbs. Haynes' list does not follow this pattern. Given the substantial differences in content, order, and erroneous attribution of a picostyle, it is difficult to see how Haynes compiled her list from Wellmhofer 2009. That is polite for Haynes is full of it, and she's lying. That's basically what that is. It's far more polite than I'm going to be. But then again, I'm not writing a nice fancy article for a pretend journal full of LARP scientists. Yeah, I know, Dr. Duff, I'm a little bit more harsh than you are on these guys, I know.
No, it's justified. I feel bad for her because she's way out of her element.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, I've looked at her dissertations over. She has no expertise in this area at all, and she's being thrown into like, okay, we have this PhD. This is your job, right? We need you to respond to these things.
Mhm.
And I got to imagine that this makes her very uncomfortable. I would hope that she's a little uncomfortable. If she's not, then that's just a form of arrogance that's unrepairable and unredeemable. But I think that she's probably I would expect when she saw this response, it was very difficult to muster up the courage to respond to this.
Well, and she did.
Maybe that's why there's so many words. It's just 40 pages of fluff.
Yeah. Carrie Bronson for $2 says, petition to pronounce ARJ like ARG out of pain.
Arg.
Arg. I like it. In her figure 6 illustrating tailbones from Archaeopteryx, various theropods, dinosaurs, and modern birds, Haynes identifies a rod-like portion of the tail acting as picostyles, which is not a sentence that makes sense. Or sorry, not a noun phrase that makes sense. That's not a full sentence. In Archaeopteryx, Microraptor, Sinornithosaurus, Anchiornis, and Caudipteryx. Among these taxa, only Caudipteryx has a picostyle composed of fused distal caudal vertebrae, and its morphology is quite different from that of modern birds. Yes, that is an important thing to remember. Caudipteryx looks like it has a picostyle in the same way that birds do, but it actually doesn't. The morphology is considerably different. The only other dinosaurs known to have a picostyle are Nomingia, likely equivalent to Elmosaurus raris from Funston et al. I'm not going to read every single citation. You can see them. And Simula Caudipteryx. Hey, Wang, and Zhu, whatever. Altogether, picostyle-like fused vertebrae do not occur at the ends of the tails of the Therizinosaur Bepiosaurus and the bizarre Ornithomimosaur Dinochirus. Microraptor and Sinornithosaurus possess elongate tails that are stiffened into a rod by hyper-elongated prezygopophyses and hemoarches. So these are various... So the hemoarches are just bones that project down away from the caudal vertebrae. They are sort of like ribs in that way. And their prezygopophyses are just more projections that come anterior to the zygopophyses. And in these, they are they're basically, they stretch far back towards the front of the animal in the distal end of the tail. That's the back end of the tail. And in many cases, like in some dromaeosaurids, they actually connect to previous vertebrae via a tendon, which then ossified throughout life. So that this is really now just a collection of bones that stiffens the tail, but it doesn't smush the vertebrae together like you get in a picostyle, where you get several vertebrae that are just sort of like compressed from front to back, right? It's sort of like the coccyx in a human, right? Like that's 3 to 5 vertebrae just shoved into a tiny space. It's similar what's happening with birds. Not exactly the same, obviously. This arrangement is called a Caudotheca, Center et al. 2012. It is found widely among the dromaeosaurs, such as Bambiraptor, which is a great name, Bambiraptor, Deinonychus, Velociraptor, and Genuine as well as Rhamphorhynchid pterosaurs, persons and Curie, and the Caudotheca is altogether distinct from picostyle, yes, as there is no fusion of the bones, again, very much yes, but rather an interweaving of bony processes among the vertebrae. We are unclear how the Caudotheca is acting as a picostyle. Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Since the picostyle anchors tail feathers, while the Caudotheca has long been recognized as a balancing structure for these bipedal theropod dinosaurs. Yes, Ostrom from 1969. This is unchallenged since then. Yeah, that's what a Caudotheca does.
I love this. Just the younger creationists are on the cutting edge of the scientific, community.
Well, this whole section is just, it's just tearing up Haynes. I mean,
yeah, I'm not sure how she survived reading this. Like, yeah, she probably should have just died in shame. Just like, oh, I'm done.
I mean, if I had published a paper that bad and had my own peers in my own journal savage me this hard, I would simply walk into the sea.
Alex Markle points out, hey, she got her degree from a legit university. It's all on her for putting her lot in with pseudoscientists. Yeah, no, I agree, right? She brought this on herself. She didn't have to publish a paper full of nonsense about a topic she very evidently does not understand. She didn't have to do that. And even if her boss made her do it, she could get a different job. Like, she's clearly a skilled paleontologist when it comes to insect paleontology, right? She could have gone on to have a nice, happy career at some school, teaching about the details of Mesozoic beetle anatomy, while spending her time describing collections from museums of otherwise uncategorized insect wings from some formation in Brazil, like she did for her thesis.
Mhm.
And you know what? She would have been great at that. And then, she probably would be publishing on not terribly controversial but good work. And there you go. She wouldn't even really
I don't
have.
think she expected this response. She didn't expect to get
Oh,
this
absolutely
response.
not. No. Well, the thing is, fundamentally, ARJ is not a journal, right? It is not aimed at real scientists doing real science. It's barely even aimed at other creation scientists who are doing what they pass off as science, right? It exists for one purpose. So that Answers in Genesis can say, we are a real research institute. We publish a journal. Look at all the papers in it. They're not actually even intended to be read at all, I think.
No, it's there for their audience. When somebody asks a question, they go like, "Oh, see, we published this paper on it."
Mhm.
Something that audience member probably can't read, but they'll accept. It'll look scientific. It'll sound scientific.
Yep.
And then they won't ask another question.
It's like when you're running a tabletop RPG, right? And the players find an ancient tome, so you pull out like that fancy notebook that you stained with coffee and filled with nonsense in some other language, and you hand it to them. And they're like, wow, that's really cool. This looks really authentic. Yeah, it does. It does look cool. It does look authentic. Once again, we're just at the point where Answers in Genesis are just LARPers. And hey, there's nothing wrong with LARP, as long as you know that's what you're doing. When you think you're actually hurling lightning bolts by throwing blue beanbags at each other, now we come to our problem, which is what Answers in Genesis is doing. If they were just like, oh yeah, we like to pretend to be scientists and make our little papers about this alternate reality where the Earth is only 6,000 years old, fine, have fun with that. But no, they want people to take them seriously. And that's also...
I think they would have...
I'm sorry.
I think they would have liked to have not published this paper.
Oh, yeah.
But that whole young Earth evolution thing that they went on the rampage about, and these are young Earth evolutionists, and I think that they got so much pushback from that if it got found out that they rejected this paper by them, then I think that they would just be bringing more upon themselves. So I think they felt compelled to respond, but that also meant that Haynes had to write this answer to it. And that's what she's not prepared for.
Plus, if they had been rejected from the Answers Research Journal, they would have just published in like Creation Science Quarterly or something, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And it would still be out there, and we would still be reading it today because I still would have noticed. DM current
ARJ couldn't take that chance. They would send it somewhere else because then it would take them 6 months to respond. And they want that response to be right next to it so that they can just say, oh, we've responded. Look no further.
DM current issues in Science Wing for $2 says Mazes and Monsters is a far out game. Mazes and Monsters. What was the name of the fake RPG from that movie where Tom Hanks goes crazy and thinks he's inside the game and it's all real? And it was just like a Satanic Panic scare you about Dungeons and Dragons movie. Can't remember what the name of that game was. Was it? It was something. Strawberry Main for $5 says, well, the ARJ looks like a real journal, doesn't it? Yeah, and hey, as we all know, when it comes to pseudoscience, looks like is the highest bar of evidence. So, all right.
It's indexed, on Google Scholar and other places.
Yes.
So
it's
legit.
How did that even happen? Why does Google Scholars list that as a journal that they index? Like, if I've
always wondered that myself.
Like, if I just start a web page and I call it like the Dapper Journal, are they going to start indexing it on Google Scholar if I publish things that look like papers?
I think there's a way to apply for to get a DOI. I mean, there's a certain classification. And I think once you gain that classification, everything will be indexed from that.
Okay. Maybe we should start our own journal just to point out that just being indexed on Google Scholar doesn't mean much, and we can publish things about like how to create moon water with crystals and leaving crystals in your water overnight in the full moon, because that's a thing that people think is real. Oh wait, it was Mazes and Monsters. That's the actual game from the movie. Okay, thank you, Tesla Ranger. See, my audience is great. If I don't know the answer to a question, they probably do. No caudotheca is developed in Archaeopteryx, which possesses only mildly enlarged pre-zygapophyses and haemal arches that do not extend beyond the vertebral centrum. The centrum, by the way, is the big disc part of a vertebra, which results in the distal two-thirds of its tail being stiff or somewhat elastic. This condition is also seen in some dromaeosaurids, like Achillobiter, Buiceroraptor, and Utahraptor, and troodontids. Let's see. Anchiornis possesses neither fused vertebrae nor a caudotheca, so its tail is certainly not rod-like at all, but flexible. I would point out it's going to be less flexible than most lizard tails because this is a tetnuran theropod, and all tetnuran theropods, which is basically Allosaurus and almost every other theropod that you've ever heard of, except for like Ceratosaurus, the abellosaurids like Carnotaurus, and some of the very, very old theropods like Coelophysis or Dilophosaurus. But almost every theropod you've ever heard of is a tetnuran. Tetnuran actually means like stiff-tailed. That's literally the point of being tetnuran, is that your tail is a bit stiffer than most other dinosaurs. Importantly, the comparative taxa presented by Haynes are all members of various dinosaurian families within Maniraptora, Dromaeosauridae, Troodontidae, and Caudipteridae. And none of the tails among this group are remotely similar to those of birds presented in her figure 6, which all possess actual pyhostyles: goose, juvenile, Watsine, and ostrich. Yeah, that paragraph is pretty vicious. That paragraph alone could just be the paper. Yep. Also in figure 6, Haynes offers a criterion of 10 or fewer caudal vertebrae before a transition point to a pygostyle or rod-like tail as a way to classify Archaeopteryx and the Maniraptorans mentioned above as birds. However, the nature of this purported transition point is undefined, unexplained, and we believe a highly questionable approach to delineating dinosaurs and birds. Yeah, because I don't know what that means either. Right? It's a transition of what, right? Like when I point out that one of the ways that we can tell that a whale pelvis is a pelvis is because of the transition between sacral and caudal vertebrae, I can tell you what about the vertebrae means that there's a transition happening there, right? Like you can see it in things like, the lateral projections from the vertebrae that change their nature fundamentally around the point where you get to the hip. So when I say that, I can tell you why there's a transition, and I can point to you to where it is and why it's significant. But with this, it was just like, there's a transition in the tail somewhere. It's a thing. It happens. Okay. Even if Haynes' proposed transition point was legitimate, that's just that phrase. Yeah. Even if Haynes' proposed transition point was a legitimate character, why would this single feature be more important than other characters used to distinguish birds from dinosaurs? Why could not we separate dinosaurs and birds by the presence or absence of clawed digits in adults, or the presence or absence of true teeth? Well, you couldn't with clawed digits because so many birds have clawed digits.
Also, I know that it's me being a pedant, but I would have changed the grammar of that instead of wording it the way they did. Let me see if I can. Instead of why could we not? Never mind. I don't even want to critique this grammar. I don't even want to do it. I don't have the energy. No, just don't even care.
Indeed, if we consider the pectoral muscles used in flight, we would find that Archaeopteryx shares more in common with Coelurosaurian dinosaurs than with Confuciusornis and other birds. Yes. Archaeopteryx does not have a keeled sternum. Its flight muscles would have been weak at best. It has the musculature in its arms, essentially, that is basically just that of Velociraptor, right? It's not something that's going to be good at flying. It was probably an okay glider. Actually, it was probably a good glider. I'll give it that. It's probably a good glider. Alternatively, a recent discovery of preserved intestinal remains on a feathered dromaeosaurid show that dromaeosaurids had more in common with Coelurosaurian dinosaurs than modern birds in their alimentary canals. Why should the number of caudal vertebrae be more vital to classification than dentition, wing musculature, or digestive anatomy? Yeah, I don't know. After all, the number of tail vertebrae are highly variable, and many animals have shorter or longer tails than in incredibly close relatives. For example, wakaris, bobcats, etc. Yes, that group of the small cats, which includes like the lynx, bobcats, whatnot, they all have relatively short tails, but how many vertebrae and how long those tails are vary considerably within that group. Even individuals of the same species can vary in the number of caudal vertebrae. As noted above, specimens of Archaeopteryx possess between 21 and 23 caudals. Such traits are justifiably considered minimally informative among taxonomists. And actually, I also pointed out, humans have a variable number of caudal vertebrae, right? Your coccyx, if you're a human, is composed of a certain number of caudal vertebrae, but it varies from person to person. Even it's not even just caudal vertebrae, right? Different members of Equus caballus, the horse, have different numbers of ribs. There are some breeds of Suscrofa, the pig, that are bred to have way more ribs than normal, specifically because humans like to eat ribs. And so you breed a pig with more ribs. This is something that can vary very easily within a species. Silver Harlow for $5 says, does ARJ paywall its papers so that only people who have access to the university library can read it? Because that's apparently key to being a journal. I don't think so. I don't think I've ever seen a paywall on an ARJ paper.
No.
Yeah, because, again, they want the papers to be seen, but not so much read. And so they want it to be easy for anyone to just find an ARJ paper. But the people who tend to look for ARJ papers come in 3 categories. Other creationists who are LARPing as scientists. People who have absolutely no clue what's going on and are young Earth creationists. And that's primarily the real audience, just to look impressive. And then people like us, who are critics of young Earth creationism for various reasons. And we're the group they really don't want finding these papers, but they can't really keep us from them without keeping their target audience, which is the people who don't know what they're looking at, but who are young Earth creationists by virtue of just going to a young Earth creationist church. Which, by the way, that group of people I really don't have much of a quarrel with, right? They are duped. They are the victims of this. Because
I just pointed out the Creation Research Quarterly, which is from the Creation Research Society, so a different group than Answers in Genesis. You have to pay dues in order to get their access to their journal. It's always been that way, and they often don't ever publish some of those articles. It's very difficult to get that stuff. It's very frustrating to me because I don't want to pay the, it's like
I wouldn't either.
$50, $75 a year just for 4 issues.
Well, here's what I will say. It is not okay to go to Sci-Hub and look up those papers on Sci-Hub, because that is pirating and you are taking food off the table of the Creation Science Quarterly editorial staff's families tables. Yeah, don't do that. Don't go to sci-hub.se. I'm giving you the URL so you know where not to go. Can't make it clear enough. Do not go
You've
to...
been fairly warned.
Yes.
Been fairly warned.
Yes, do not go to sci-hub.se. Don't do it. Okay. It appears then that Haynes assigns a number of dinosaurs to birds: Microraptor, Sinornithosaurus, Anchiornis, and Caudipteryx. Their blue coloration in Figure 6 is also employed in extant birds, and contrasted with the green coloration given to several theropod tails lower in the figure. There is no further discussion of the figure, but it appears that her class... Yeah, that's a good point. She doesn't actually explain what the colors mean. They're just there. And they're right. It seems like she's using them to differentiate birds and dinosaurs, but she doesn't actually say that. There's no further discussion of the figure, but it appears that her classification assignments follow those of Clary 2015 and Thomas and Sarfati 2018 and Sir Hadi, Thomas, and Tay 2020 in splitting apart various theropod families into dinosaur and bird members. And Haynes adds to this list by assigning Sinornithosaurus a dromaeosaurid to birds. We find Haynes' argument that these dinosaurs should be categorized as birds unjustified given the well-defined skeletal definitions of these dinosaurian groups, the incorrect assertion of pyhostyles or pygostyle-like tails among these taxa, and the questionable argument of an undefined transition point along the tail. Yeah, good. That should... all of those should raise red flags. A far more parsimonious conclusion is that substantial number of dinosaurs possess true feathers. Yes! Watsine, Archaeopteryx, and character states. I don't know what the obsession with what the Watsine is with creationists. I just don't get it.
Maybe they just like saying it.
But they always say it wrong, though. They always call it the Hawatsin.
The Watson, yeah.
No, I've yet to hear a young Earth creationist say Watsine. Now, maybe Haynes actually would say Watsine because she probably knows enough about Spanish, being from South America, to know how to pronounce that word. But, they all just say Hawatsin.
I have to laugh. I've been influenced by young Earth creationists. I just realized because I've been pronouncing it incorrectly because they're the only ones I've ever heard say it.
Oh, no!
Oh no!
The shame.
Dun,
Well-
dun, dun.
Well, now you know. It's Watson and not Watson. Haynes reference to a few analogous structures. Duff's like, I'm sticking with Watson.
Right, it sounds cooler.
It does sound cool.
I'm not sticking with it. I just know that I'm old and I'm going to say the same thing again anyway, and then I'll remember as soon as I say it, and I'll be like,
Haynes reference to a
Can't
few
let me
analogous structures.
So,
Oh, sorry.
Does that mean I should like maybe crush your spirit by telling you how to correctly pronounce axolotl?
Uh-oh.
oh, yeah, boy.
Because it's not axolotl at all.
Axolotl.
It's axolotl.
Tell me.
And if you're like, oh, I don't feel like making that sound, then just use the Spanish version, which is ajolote.
Yay.
Oh. I look at words like that and I just say that word there that I'm not going to pronounce. Just move
it's
on.
a Nahuatl word, but yeah, it's not axolotl.
I mean, look,
Axolotl.
many modern varieties of Nahuatl are just drop that to a T, so you could just say axolotl.
Axolotl.
You could say that. Yeah, axolotl.
Haynes reference to a few analogous.
The
very
opportunity
cute, and they
arises.
Guys, we
There you
gotta
go.
get through more of
They're
this.
little
Let
salamanders.
me get through some of this.
Yes.
Haynes reference to a few analogous structures between the South American Watson and crows is certainly not evidence that many homologous structures in Archaeopteryx and dinosaurs should be ignored or downplayed. I don't even know how that argument is supposed to work. Look at the similarities between the Watson and crows. Therefore, Archaeopteryx isn't a dinosaur. Like, I just don't get it. The Watson's expanded crop ferments plant material, and so does a cow's rumen, yet the anatomy of these two structures are entirely different. Oh my goodness, it's almost like convergent evolution, where you have different designs. Does that mean different designers? I don't know. I've always wondered that.
Huh.
If same design, same designer means, if that works, then shouldn't different design mean different designers? Seems like it to me. This means that our organs are analogous, rather different anatomical structures performing a similar function, rather than homologous, composed of the equivalent anatomical structure. So yeah, I think you were right, Dr. Duff, when you were talking about
Good.
how it's about like development and things like that. So yeah, I think you were right about that. Likewise, the presence of wing claws in Watsons does not allow the homologous structures in Archaeopteryx and dinosaurs to be dismissed. Watson wing claws are not unique among birds. Yes, thank you. Finally, a young Earth creationist who notices that
Thank
it's
you,
not
goodness.
just the Watson. The presence of one or two wing claws and rarely a third non-keratinized, non-ossified claw is a relatively common feature among living birds, including parrots, ratites, for example, ostriches and cassowaries, and raptors, for example, great gray owls, red-tailed hawks. Watsons and all other extant flying birds that have wing claws possess the same basic type of hand/wings, a fusion of hand bones, the carpometacarpus, and 1 to 2 bones phalanges per finger besides the claw if present. In contrast, Archaeopteryx had non-fused carpals and metacarpals and long multiple phalanx fingers tipped with fully ossified claws, much like Deinonychus, which they're giving us here we go. So we have in A, Deinonychus, B, Archaeopteryx, and in C, we have Passer domesticus, the house sparrow. Rosina Keller, who's been a member for 3 months and is at the tetrapod level, says, how many times has the appendix been gained/lost? I mean, in evolutionary history, more times than we even know about, because there's no way to know how many times it might have happened in fossil animals. So, I mean, at least I can think, at least in mammals, probably 3 or 4 times. But one of the things I want to look at with these bones, right? So here we have a definite bird with C, and we have a definite dinosaur with A. Now, yeah, birds are dinosaurs, but Gabriella Haynes is arguing that B is more like C than it is like A. And what I want to bring your attention to, right, is digit 3. So all these digits are numbered in this diagram going from right to left. So in digit 3, we have a metacarpal, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 phalanges. Well, the thing I want you to notice, though, is that phalanges 1 and 2 are tiny compared to 3 and 4. Just like they are in B. Even the relative sizes of the phalanges line up better with Deinonychus and Archaeopteryx than they do between Archaeopteryx and a bird. I cannot understand
So much for the looks like argument.
Right? How can you look at these 3 hands and say B and C go together and A is the odd man out?
Oh, that's rascalism.
I cannot understand how anyone can do that, honestly. You look at these and you're like, oh yeah, B and C, definitely the same thing. A, some kind of weird monster hand, I don't know.
How do we do some research? Create a kid's book. It's got these 3 images. One of these is not like the other.
Right, yeah,
How
we
many
just,
times
Yep.
do you pick and see?
we could do the classic Kent Hovind, ask a 5-year-old. Every
Yes.
5-year-old
Yeah.
in the world is going to say C is the odd man out, not A. Pibblepunk,
Yep.
the Apistivist, says, welcome to Answers Research Journal, the journal where the papers are made up and the standards don't matter. Oh, awesome. Haynes also refers to Watzians as phylogenetic enigmas, but this merely concerns which group.
What?
Yeah. But this merely concerns which bird group is most similar to Watzians. No one questions the classification of Watzians as birds or thinks it might be more closely related to crows or cows or reptiles. Watzians are highly unusual among living birds. That's true. But the taxon is part of Neornithes, crown group birds according to evolutionists. Yes. Thus, even according to the evolutionary theory, the Watzien is not considered any more reptilian than any other living bird. Again, yes. I mean, all birds are fully reptilian because they're reptiles. It is likely that Watzians are in their own created kind, although research is necessary to evaluate this hypothesis.
Oh my goodness, that is such
Good luck,
hope.
guys. Good luck with that. The situation of Archaeopteryx and Maniraptoriform dinosaurs is unquestionably different in that numerous anatomical traits seen in specimens of Archaeopteryx show clear homology to theropod dinosaurs. We're returning to the random selection of 20 characters from Table 1 above. Whatever, we're going to skip this because we didn't go through that. Differences between Archaeopteryx and Confuciusornis are found in 3 characters. Okay, but it's still more of that. Aww, look at the puppy. Skeletal pneumaticity.
Whee!
That was very cute. Oh, is that the one who recently got a haircut? Yeah, I saw that, I think, on your Twitter feed.
Yeah. Sorry, muted. Yep, she just got shaved down.
Aw.
She's a sheepdog. She should have hair like hanging down over her eyes.
Did you turn it into a sweater?
I could. It's literally a bag full. Not 3 bags full, but it's a full bag full.
I knew a woman who actually did take, she had I think 3 dogs, all of which had very wool-like fur, and yeah, she turned them into sweaters. She took the fur, she spun it into yarn herself, and then she knit sweaters from it. And I was just like, that is...
Yeah.
Oh, hey, Paleologos says, good afternoon to Dapper Dinosaur and Joel Duff. Hey, what's up, Peter? Glad you're here.
Not good hello to me.
Yeah,
Gosh.
no, you don't count.
I don't count.
Nope. You're just here so that we have no, I lost it.
You got your high.
You're here for the references. You insert a lot of nice references.
Cries.
Concerning pneumatization of the skeleton. So by the way, skeletal pneumaticity, right, is the idea that you have these air pockets in the bone, and importantly, they seem to be connected to the respiratory system. So I'm just going to put that out there as a quick little definition. Concerning pneumatization of the skeleton, we agree with Haynes that the best evidence so far points to its main role being a lightening of the skeleton in birds, pterosaurs, sauropods, and theropods, which is important. People don't think this, but yet sauropods have highly pneumatized skeletons, especially in the neck. Right? Those bones are in large part air, because otherwise, how would you get to be that big? You would collapse on yourself. That it is unclear what role, if any, pneumatization might play in respiration. However, Haynes appears to misunderstand the evidence for skeletal pneumaticity in these animals and how soft parts are inferred in fossil organisms. I love that. Appears to misunderstand, by which you mean has no clue what's happening right now. Haynes makes the argument that skeletal pneumatization in dinosaurs should not be taken as evidence for the presence of bird-like air sacs, and the only reason scientists have argued this is to support the theory of the relationship between birds and dinosaurs, which, no, we've noticed skeletal pneumaticity in dinosaurs long before that was like the firm conclusion. Oh, Paleologo says, don't cry at Vishanti with a wave. There you go. You've been acknowledged by Peter.
Yay! Hep face.
O'Connor recognized the claims of postcranial skeletal pneumaticity in non-ornithodyrene archosaurs, for example, crocodilians, were misidentified. So there have been some things like that. However, there are still some non-ornithodyrene archosaurs that do still seem to have some skeletal pneumaticity. It's a little iffy. Anyway, holes in cavities and bones are not automatic evidence for pneumaticity. We're just going to put, instead of PSP, we're just going to say pneumaticity, because yeah, it stands for postcranial skeletal pneumaticity, but that's long. As they can be related to the presence of fat bodies or blood vessels. That's true. True pneumaticity.
Instead of using the abbreviation, you choose to use the long word.
Well, because PSP doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, but it's defined right there. You just told us what it is.
I'm going to call it pneumaticity.
Okay.
It's my show. I do what I want.
Okay.
True pneumaticity comes in the form of foramina or fossae connected to a large internal chamber in bones. O'Connor then proceeds to say that true pneumaticity is found in theropods, sauropods, and pterosaurs, and that vertebral and costal pneumaticity in neotheropods supports the inference of cervical and abdominal air sacs in this group, in addition to pneumatization directly from the lung. Butler, Barrett, and Gower also find unambiguous evidence of pneumaticity in birdline ornithodyrene archosaurs. Haynes cites both of these references as evidence in favor of her position, when they in fact argue the complete opposite. Once again, Haynes citing something to support herself that actually is a Trojan source. That's one of our drink triggers normally. A Trojan source is when the creationist cites a source, and rather than supporting them, it actively contradicts them. Not just doesn't support them, but actively contradicts the point they're trying to make. Strawberry Bane for $5 says, I have a long-haired cat whose fur gets up to 7 inches long. I measured it. Wow. That is a long-haired cat, I'll say. My goodness. Sorry. So we don't have a whole lot longer that I can be on here. And by the way, we're probably not doing Power Rangers, because after this, I have to go over to Chesh's channel and do some Unnamed Tavern, which is sort of a news compilation show where we go over interesting news stories. So, Chesh, if you're still in the chat, put a link to your channel. Beyond this discussion of pneumaticity and anatomy, Haynes' argument that the only reason scientists would claim these structures were in some dinosaurs is because they believe dinosaurs evolved into birds reveals a seeming misunderstanding of biological similarity and comparative anatomy. Applications of comparative anatomy and physiology hold up whether someone believes in universal common descent or not. When we test medications on a rat and they include liver failure, we assume the same may be true for a human, even though we do not believe humans and rats share a common ancestor. We're not going to get into why that is a weird thing to assume, but sure, we'll keep going. We believe this because through scientific study, we realize that humans and rats are built along similar mammalian blueprints. We correctly recognize the homology of the radius and the ulna in the bird's wing and a manatee's flipper, even while we, as young Earth creationists, reject the argument of common ancestry among them. What I would be more interested in is what's up with the manatee fingernails? Because I don't know if you know this, but manatee flippers have little fingernails at the end. Yeah. What are those for? Was that designed? Was God just having a goof by giving them fingernails? God was like, this will confuse all of the scientists.
Designing them like, this is really going to throw them off. Hey.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so they can scratch each other's bellies.
Do they do that,
they
though?
Love it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. If you go down there, they'll roll over for you. They want you to scratch them. They probably scratch each other's.
Okay, fair enough.
See?
I mean, it's not as crazy as all the things dolphins get up to with each other. Which is not safe for YouTube, by the way.
Yeah, that's not safe for YouTube. It's not safe for mental health.
Let's just say lots of things going in various places. All over the place. Being a creationist does not... Yeah, dolphins are... Being a creationist does not mean we reject homology, which is, again, weird because it kind of should mean that, but it doesn't for these guys, I guess. Rather, we reject the... so also, other young Earth creationists do reject homology as a concept, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah. Rather, we reject the idea that homology can only be explained by common descent, and instead affirm homology as a reflection of God's design plans. Which, again, then raises the question of, well, if structures are analogous, does that mean different design, different designer? I would argue that if you're going to say same design, same designer, then different design must argue for more than one designer. I mean, I don't know how you can be logically consistent and not find that to be the conclusion that you have to come to. The most anatomically similar extant animals to dinosaurs and pterosaurs are crocodilians and birds. I mean, absolutely. And I can't forget Adelaide penguins. I mean, I feel like I'm not forgetting Adelaide penguins, but I'm not sure what I'm supposed to specifically remember about them. All right, so this is confirmed by genetic studies that consistently place birds closer to crocodilians than to any other animal. Yep. Thus, it is not unreasonable to look at a bird and a crocodilian soft tissue anatomy to make hypotheses about those structures not preserved in the fossil record. Yeah. No, I would agree. Of course, there will be surprises, but comparison to living creatures helps ground our speculation. 100% agree with that. Acknowledging anatomical similarity is not the same as acknowledging evolutionary history, and to think or act in this manner is tacit agreement that similarity is evidence for evolutionary descent. Now, I agree and disagree, right? I do agree that creationists typically do not see these kinds of similarities as proof positive of common descent. But I disagree that they are not, in fact, evidence for common descent. They are, in fact, evidence for common descent, but I do agree that creationists are not under an obligation to accept that fact. And they don't in many other cases, right? I've never yet met a young Earth creationist arguing that whales aren't mammals.
Totally fair statement. Yeah.
Paleologo says, at least some people argue that manatee fingernails serve to protect the flipper while manatees drag or paw at the bottom. That makes sense, although they're fairly small, so I'm not sure how much protection, but I guess some is better than none. Miscellaneous paleontological issues. I love that. There's so much wrong that they have a miscellaneous section. I've never seen a miscellaneous section in a paper before. Not that this is a real paper, but, you know. In addition to the above issues, there are some minor errors in Haynes' 2022 that nonetheless troubling to see in a paper on vertebrate paleontology. Haynes refers to Majungasaurus as a sauropod, the enormous long-necked dinosaurs, when in fact it is a theropod, the bipedal carnivorous dinosaur. Specifically, it's an abelisaur, so it's in the same family as Carnotaurus. And that's weird. Also, Majungasaurus is the dinosaur for which we have the best evidence of avian-style air sacs throughout the thoracic cavity, because we actually have preserved structures indicating the presence of bird-like thoracic and cervical air sacs. So Majungasaurus breathed like a bird. So I don't even know why Haynes brought it up. She probably should have just let that one lie. Haynes labels Sapiornis an enantiornithine, but it does not belong to this group. It is instead an omnivoraptorigid, an extinct bird group outside of Pygostylia. Haynes also wrote that Hillman propagated a view that helped to shape the idea of the relationship between Archaeopteryx and dinosaurs, when in fact Hillman argued in his 1926 book that birds were not descended from dinosaurs because dinosaurs lacked clavicles. Hillman's clavicle argument would later be disproved when clavicles were discovered on dinosaurs. Yes, once again, Haynes citing someone that's arguing the exact opposite of what her citation says they're arguing. How many times does it have to happen before we say Haynes is just dishonest? I was willing to say it basically the first time it happened. And I don't know how many more examples we need before that just becomes the thing that she's known for. I would be mortified to find that that I had published something where I cited someone and they actually said the exact opposite. That would mean I did something horribly stupid at the very best. So that's not to say I don't cite people who disagree with me, but I usually cite them to say this is where this claim might be coming from. And then I'll usually disagree with the claim. Finally, Haynes states the arched back neck is seen in Archaeopteryx specimens has been demonstrated to happen in hypersaline water. However, experimental research on this phenomenon, called the opistotonic death posture, has indicated it occurs in cool freshwater. Yep, that is very true. And other researchers previously could not replicate the posture in saltwater. Again, yes, this topic is in dire need of further experimental research from Creationists and will be an excellent taphonomy project. I actually don't disagree there. I do think it would be a good taphonomic research project for anyone. Interpreting scripture, I don't care. Let's see. Conclusion. Basically, I am not here to tell anyone how to interpret the Bible. That is a job for other people. Talk to your priest, your pastor, your rabbi, historians, Bible scholars. Those are all people you can talk to about that. I am none of those things. I'm not your priest. I'm not your rabbi. I'm not your pastor. I'm not here for that. Rather than Archaeopteryx' position as a bird being, quote, straightforward, we find that the situation is more complex. Organismal biology and taxonomy are demanding fields of study that require careful attention to minute details. In paleontology, uncertainties are increased by the limited nature of the specimens as fossilized remains instead of living organisms. Nonetheless, confidence in certain conclusions can be found when employing rigorous standards of comparative anatomy. Yeah, I agree 100% with that. There's actually not that much in this particular work that I disagree with. I mean, obviously, there's some silly YEC nonsense here and there, and it has what I consider to be a completely irrelevant biblical discussion. But overall, I tend to agree with the thrust of this paper. We can reasonably conclude that a large number of theropod dinosaurs possess feathers or feather-like integument. This is a point that Haynes appears to grant, although it is unclear if Haynes actually accepts the assignment of filamentous and predaceous feathers found within these fossils as legitimate, and she also reclassifies some of these taxa as birds. We further conclude that the general morphology of Archaeopteryx is remarkably similar to Maniraptoran dinosaurs, particularly Dromaeosaurids, right? Remember when we saw those hands? And yeah, where Haynes is like, oh yeah, Archaeopteryx, totally a bird. Deinonychus, no. And it's like, what are you... how, many of which are also known to possess pernicious feathers. In our estimation, Haynes has come to erroneous taxonomic conclusions based on a misunderstanding on cladistics, statistical baraminology, comparative anatomy, dinosaurs, birds, and the interpretation of Genesis 1. That is a lot to be erroneous about.
Yes.
Oh my
Jeez.
goodness.
I mean,
That's my favorite line in the whole paper.
yeah, misunderstandings on cladistics, statistical baraminology, comparative anatomy, dinosaurs, birds, and the interpretation of Genesis 1. So basically, literally everything she said in her
Everything.
paper. Yeah. These misunderstandings have led her to conclusions stated with far more certainty than is justified by the available evidence. Yeah, to put it mildly. Despite these disagreements, we wish to make it abundantly clear that we agree with Haynes on all of the crucial issues. I don't care about the issues pertaining to Scripture. It's meaningless to me. As creationists, we must be willing to evaluate the data from nature on its own terms. Well, then maybe you should evaluate all of it, guys. Maybe stop excluding relevant organisms from your baraminology studies. I don't know. Regardless of whether a discovery is made by a creationist or an evolutionist, our goal as scientists is to understand God's world so that we may grasp a more accurate picture of who God is and what he made, and in so doing, give glory to God and proclaim him to all those we meet. That's fine with me. If that's your motivation for doing science, I am A-okay with it, as long as you do good work. We will necessarily disagree with each other as we seek to accomplish this task in the sciences, for we are ignorant, fallible creatures, but above all, we must conduct ourselves personally and professionally with behavior that glorifies our Heavenly Father. Now, okay, Dr. Duff, as a Christian, do you find it glorifying to God to cite numerous authors and say that they support the exact opposite of their position in the papers that you're citing?
No, I mean, and again, I don't know her motivation or how much. I'm always careful, to say that somebody isn't lying or purposely did that, but there is definitely a high degree of naivete if that's the case. But to the question of whether that's proper or not, no, I would find that that's not ethical, and we're called to be good. Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, it's not proper behavior, and it's not. I don't know. Keep talking. I'll say something in a minute.
Paleologus is asking if I saw.
You got me flustered.
Oh, it's okay. Paleologus is asking if I saw Haynes' odd objection to one of McLean's citations because it was written by basically someone who profoundly disparages creationists. I did see that. I am planning to go over her response to this response at a later time. So yeah, don't worry. We'll be getting into just how inadequate her response is, as well as just how absurdly long it is. It is way longer than this, and it addresses almost nothing that is actually very important. Yeah, it's very strange. So yeah, this is basically the time where we're doing like final thoughts on this. I think overall, this is an excellent refutation of almost everything that Gabriella Haynes said. It exposes some of the same things that we talked about when Vishanti and I went over the paper the first time, which was like almost a year ago now.
Oh my goodness, has it been that long?
Yeah, it really has. I checked. Like she just seems to have no understanding of any of the things she's talking about, which I'm not someone who thinks everyone should know all of this stuff, right? Like if I meet someone at the grocery store and I'm like, so how do you feel about the opistotonic death posture in Ornithodyryn archosaurs? I expect to get looked at like I'm from Mars, right? Like that's fine. But when you write a paper about it, I do expect you to know what the heck you're talking about. It's the same thing why
absolutely.
It's why I dog Kent Hovind about not knowing what a dinosaur is. I don't expect most people to know the like various anatomical definitions for Dinosauria as a clade. But if you're going to call yourself an expert on, quote, dinosaurs and the Bible, end quote, I expect you to know what a dinosaur is, and I expect you to know that the book Timothy in the Bible starts out addressing Timothy from Paul and was not written by Timothy, which is what Kent Hovind repeatedly states. He thinks Timothy wrote the book of Timothy. If he did it as a forgery, basically. Maybe Timothy did forge a letter to himself from Paul. I don't know.
Okay.
But it's certainly not the conclusion that you would get as a biblical literalist as to who wrote Timothy. So that's why I dog on him for that. If some random person said, well, I guess Timothy wrote the book of Timothy, that makes sense, right? Like, we think the traditional attribution is that Mark wrote Mark and Luke wrote Luke. Okay, I mean, that would make sense to think.
Yeah, this is just what upsets me about, this is why I have such a passion to talk about young earth creationism and answers in Genesis in particular, because McLean and others, I disagree with them on some of their points here, and I would disagree with them, but not really the science here. As you said, I think that they have a pretty good understanding of the fossils. They're reporting the evidence. They're citing the literature properly, and Haynes doesn't have that. There's not an interest. There's not a fascination in actually understanding and, like I said before, understanding God's world, God's creation. They don't actually want to understand it. They just want to solve problems, be able to tell people who follow them, don't worry about these things. Here's the answers. But they're not. That's not a straight. That is not a. I'm having real trouble articulating myself today, but it's the. I can't find the right word. It's.
I find.
I'll come back to it.
Yeah. When I read Haynes's original paper, I think the words that I would use to describe it are profoundly incurious. She seems to have no actual interest in the subject of the paper. Because if she did, it's not hard to go find out what a pygostyle is, right? If you, like me, are interested in dinosaurs broadly or birds specifically, you go and check it out. You take a look, right? In fact,
as Vishanti said earlier, she has the solution, or she has the answer already. They know what conclusion they want to come to. And all this is an exercise in trying to find ways to make the answer sound palatable.
Yep.
And they're not interested in like, maybe there's some interesting questions here. Maybe there's a new way to understand God's creation, a new way to explore that and to pull out more information, something we didn't know before. This is all about
this is why, like, I keep saying this, and like we all keep saying, like, young earth creationism is fundamentally unscientific because it has already assumed the conclusion and goes looking for evidence to prove the conclusion they've already assumed. And I've also noticed that there is a strong tendency to be deeply uncomfortable with uncertainty and asking the kinds of questions that might threaten, like, your dogma or your theology, instead of just letting the evidence lead you to the conclusion.
Yep. Carrie Bronson for $10 says. Carrie Bronson for $10 says Casual Geographic has managed to keep his videos about dolphins up. He did so through some truly impressive euphemisms that put our AIG super chats to shame.
Oh yeah.
First, Casual Geographic is a lot of fun. I will say, not everything he says is always 100% accurate. So don't just automatically accept everything. But he'll
correct himself.
He does, yep. And he's also a lot of fun to watch. So, and hey, look, not everything I say is always 100% accurate. Everyone makes mistakes. The two keys are, one, don't lie. Don't knowingly say something that you believe to be untrue. And two, when you make a mistake, own up to it, right? That's okay. It happens. As we're going to see with Gabriella Haynes, though, that is not what she chooses to do. But that's a topic for a later time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for final thoughts. We're going to start with Vishanti, then we're going to go to Dr. Duff. I will add anything I feel needs to be added. Then I will let you know what's coming up on the channel. And then I will soon be on Shesh's channel. So Vishanti, any final thoughts?
Just continually frustrated with people who I used to be duped by because I didn't have the kind of background to refute these sorts of lazy attempts. And now that I'm learning more and filling in gaps in my own knowledge, it's just even more frustrating to hear them not even try. Like, Gabriella Haynes could have at any point checked to see whether she knew what a pygostyle was or not. Didn't do that. Published an entire paper where she got it exactly backwards. And then is ruffled when her own colleagues are calling her out for not knowing what a pygostyle is.
Yeah, you just check. That's all you have to do. Just check.
Yeah.
Strawberry vein.
You could just check.
And Strawberry Man for $5 says, just want to say thank you to Dr. Duff for always being so kind and lovely, wholesome, and to Dapper and Vishanti for always being so savage. You're welcome, Strawberry Vein, and thank you for the support. And yeah, you know,
I absolutely pulled my punches today.
you did actually.
Yeah, I didn't want to be super brutal, even though I was very tempted. It's just one of those things where I'm like, you know what? Look, I'm frustrated enough.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to vent this at the moment.
Fair.
I will save up my frustration for a target who might actually be watching.
Well, hey, Sal's bitchbait timer is still going. He might be watching. Hi, Sal.
I doubt it.
Well, yeah, that's fair.
People keep asking if we're going to do something special for the 1-year anniversary. I really think we should.
I plan to. I'm just not sure what yet. All right, Dr. Duff, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, these papers they're really frustrating to me, and you know, it's difficult for me to be like on this channel and have all of your being savage because all your points are accurate. Where can I say that you're wrong? Really?
Yeah.
No, that's a hard place to be. That's why I'm frustrated by people like Gabriella Haynes, right? And I do have appreciation for Todd Wood and McLean and these others, that they do have some ability to step back and say, I don't know. Like that's a hard question.
Mhm.
You just asked me a question I don't really have an answer for. My answer to you is obviously not wholly satisfying. And you know, they're committed to trying to find a way to find better answers in the future. I personally think they're not going to find better answers, but I can at least appreciate their efforts to say, like, I have this belief and I'm going to acknowledge when I don't have the answer and continue to trudge forward. So, you know, I'm glad this paper is out there, and I'm happy to support, you know, trying to accurately represent the scientific data and to understand arguments and understand, like, here's how science works, and here is the way you go about generating hypotheses and then testing those hypotheses. And I think that Answers in Genesis, you rarely see that kind of actual assessment of things, like allowing yourself to look at the data and allow the data to actually inform you about a position and maybe draw you to an answer that you don't like. You can still say at the end of the day, I don't like this answer and I'm going to look for another one. But if you can't allow the data to at least make you think about what you believe, then it's really not doing anything, right? And then you can't call yourself scientist. And you're exactly right. The organization should not be calling themselves creation scientists because they're not doing any form of science at all.
Mm-hmm. Nima,
so I want to add one.
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Nima for $10 says, got my Dapper Dino t-shirt in recently, and my housemate immediately stole it. I place the blame squarely on you for having such awesome merch. Anyway, thanks for all you do. Well, thank you, first of all. And obviously, the solution to this problem is to just buy 20 more. So that way, your housemate can steal a whole bunch, and you'll still have some left over. I'm kidding. Don't feel obligated to buy 20 of my t-shirts. Goodness. I don't even own one of my own t-shirts. I have one of my own phone cases. So I'm going to give some of my final thoughts here. One, I really do appreciate the authors of this, especially Marcus Ross and Matt McLean, mostly because I know who they are. I don't really recognize the other names. But also, this is not the only time that they've done things like this, to point out things where other young Earth creationists, even fairly prominent ones, are just badly off the mark. I especially remember a time when Marcus Ross talked about the idea that you see from AIG that the young age of the Earth is obvious. And he made this whole response about how actually it's really hard to come to the conclusion of a young Earth if you don't start with a particular biblical hermeneutic and the assumption that the Bible is true in the way that hermeneutic would then make sense. And that got him a lot of flack. And you know what? It's not easy to do that, right? It's not easy to go against the grain, especially when you're coming up against much more prominent members of your community than you are, right? Because let's be honest, way more people know who Ken Ham is than know who Marcus Ross is. In fact, when I say Marcus Ross and I know who that is, you guys in the audience, I'm guessing most of you have never heard of him. I've never covered him on the channel. He does not tend to make huge waves like Ken Ham does, or even I would say Kent Hovind is probably better known broadly than Marcus Ross is. And yet he's standing up there and saying, no, actually, we can't say these things. We don't actually have a way to support this. And while, yes, I do disagree with him, I do appreciate the fact that he's saying that, you need to have this core assumption in order to come to this conclusion. If you don't have it, you would never come to this conclusion. Because ultimately what that means is, it's not the scientific conclusion, right? Because the idea behind science is you try to leave behind as many assumptions as possible. And I don't think he would agree with me in stating it that way. But that's how I interpret what's going on there. And I think that this is more evidence of that he's trying to, as much as possible, make his community rigorous, which, I mean, quite frankly, young earth creationism is just a black hole of rigor. There's just, it just goes away, right? Gets sucked past that event horizon and it's never coming back out. But with that, I think what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to say what's coming up next, and then I will, make sure that Chesh doesn't yell at me too much for going over and trying to, horn in on her time. She will.
Thanks for letting me hang with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thank you very much, both of you. Dr. Duff, it's been too long that we've been, in the background talking to each other about things and then not actually having a collaboration. So I'm glad that you're here. Everyone, Dr. Duff is linked in the description. Open the description, the description of this video. Click on the link to his web or his YouTube page. Hit subscribe. Go do it. You will not regret it. Dr. Duff has some great videos. And he always says, these videos are getting a little bit too long. I love the longer ones. I'm here for the long form Dr. Duff content. So also, hey, you ever want to know anything about killdeer? Do you even know what killdeer are? Dr. Duff knows what they are. He has a whole big video about them. Doesn't even have anything to do with young earth creationism. It's just cool stuff about a particular bird called the killdeer. Anyway, so what's coming up on this channel? Well, on Tuesday, we have Matt with Maddie coming up. That is the plan. I have confirmed with Maddie over a voice chat on Wednesday that she is good for that. I'm going to be double checking with her because, things change, especially when you're a relatively new mom. Things come up, right? But yeah, that is the plan. Then on Thursday, we're having the second part of Batty Bodie's Dinosaur Delusions, which is about Bodie Hodge and his talk about dinosaurs, where he's not any better at dinosaurs than our the woman of the hour here, Gabriella Haynes, because, he probably got a bunch of his knowledge from Gabriella Haynes, let's be honest. That one's called Dinosaurs and Noah's Flood. So he's going to be talking about how the flood allegedly ties into the whole dinosaur things. And then next week, same time, my plan is to somewhat skim over the Gabriella Haynes response to this response. It's very long. We're not going to get even close to as much of it done as we did with this paper. So yeah, we're just going to hit some highlights here and there, and we're going to skip over a lot of it. But we want to take a look at it, because one of the things that I find the most interesting is, as I was reading through it, line by line, so much of what was in the thing we went over today just isn't touched on. She just ignores the vast, glaring problems, and instead she decides to spend 30 pages or something, or 40 pages, talking about how actually cladistic data sets really probably shouldn't be trusted. It's that's such a minor thing comparatively. So yeah, we're going to take a look at that. I personally, and I'm biased, I think it's an extremely inadequate response. But hey, maybe you'll disagree with me once we take a look at it. But with that, guys, thank you so much. Please make sure you hit like. And yeah, if you want to, head over to Chesh's channel, because I'm going to be live there soon. And I'm going to have no voice by the end of the day, because it's probably going to be another 3-hour show. So if you're the praying type, maybe pray for me and my vocal cords. Or my syrinx, maybe, because we don't know if Ceratosaurus would have had a syrinx or not. So yeah, if you're the praying type, I would appreciate the prayers. If you're not, then that's cool too. All right, bye, everybody. We'll see you, hopefully, on Tuesday. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Benthoven, Philgevara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Denny5252, Etheran Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chan, Kelvin Brostek Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Monkey They Them, Robert Carpenter, Sphincter of Doom, Volus, Eta V, and Strawberry Vein. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.